6:30. I call this meeting to order. Welcome everyone to meeting number 9 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Finance, and pursuant to House of Commons Order of Reference adopted on December 2nd, 2021, the committee's meeting on Bill C2, an act to provide further support in response to COVID-19. I know I've gone over a number of the health and safety measures with all of the members, as well as the witnesses that are with us today. They are ministry officials that understand the different protocols that we have to abide by: the 2-meter physical distancing, the wearing the masks, and the hygiene. So also when it comes to using our technical system here for the hybrid.
Chair?
Yep.
I believe bells are now ringing, so we're probably going to need a consent motion.
Yes, the bells have started ringing, so we're looking for UC to continue straight through till about 5 to 7 minutes before the vote. Okay, and then we will suspend at that time. Okay, terrific. Thank you. So on these hybrid sessions, as we've got Mr. Beach out on the West Coast, there's the opportunity to be able to use the interpretation at the bottom of your screen for English or French of your liking, and I believe that will be the members. I think understand everything else. And now I'd like to just welcome the witnesses that we have before us from the Department of Employment and Social Development. Alicia Ram, we've got Catherine Demers, Douglas Wolf, Benoit Cadu, George Ray, Sebastian Saint Arnaud, and from the Department of Finance, we've got Max Baylor, Lindsay Guire, Trevor McGowan, Yves Poirier are with us today. We'll now proceed with clause-by-clause consideration. So pursuant to Standing Order 75, bracket 1, consideration of the title is postponed. New clause 0.1, and this brings us to NDP 1. That is page 1 of the package. And so I look to Mr. Blakey. Do you have some comments on this? Yep.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I don't think it's a secret to anybody on the committee the extent to which a number of seniors across the country have been suffering as a result of having their guaranteed income supplement benefits clawed back. These are seniors who worked prior to the pandemic. They were eligible for CERB according to the rules. They were encouraged to apply. They weren't told that it would be clawed back later through the GIS. And I mean, this very committee heard a story of a woman, for instance, who's living in her car in the Northwest Territories at the outset of winter because she can't make rent. We had a colleague, Alistair McGregor, have a man contact him recently because he's just been diagnosed with cancer. He's got an eviction pending on December 23rd. He can't afford his medications. And the frustrating part of this all along, of course, has been that had the government chosen simply not to count that income in the eligibility calculation for the GIS, this would have been avoided. We know that the government knew about this issue as early as May of 2021, which was plenty of time to fix it before it took effect. And now we're months after it took effect and people are in crisis. So what this amendment does is it's one of the amendments required in order not to make the pandemic benefit income non-taxable. We were very clear in our direction to the drafters that the benefit income would remain taxable income, but that it would remove that income from the eligibility calculation of the guaranteed income supplement. And so that's the purpose of this amendment. We've been reassured by the drafters that that's what it does without jeopardizing the taxable status of that income. And that's why I'm moving this amendment, because it would help ensure that this gets cleared up and that it gets cleared up in legislation.
Thank you, Mr. Blakey. Any further discussion? No. So I'll now give my ruling on this amendment. It is inadmissible, and here's my reason for it. Bill C2 provides for further support in response to COVID-19. The amendment seeks to amend subparagraph 56, bracket 1, bracket R, IV 5.1 of the Income Tax Act to remove any COVID-related financial assistance amount from the calculation of the taxpayer's income in order to receive old age security benefit. As House of Commons procedure and practice, third edition states on page 770, quote, an amendment to a bill that was referred to committee after second reading is out of order. It is beyond the scope of the principle of the bill, end quote. In the opinion of the chair, the amendment is a new concept that is beyond the scope of the bill and which would also require royal recommendation. Therefore, I rule the amendment inadmissible. This ruling also applies to NDP 2 since the two amendments are consequential.
Mr. Chair,
Yep, Mr. Blakey.
I would respectfully challenge your ruling. I think one of the things to understand is that this bill does provide for pandemic benefits of a type, inadequate as they may be. And this amendment is also about ensuring that those future benefits, if paid out to seniors in a like situation, say under the Canada Worker Lockdown benefit, are not included in the calculation for their guaranteed income supplement next year. And so the topic of the bill has been the case for the entire proceeding since it began, has been pandemic benefits. This amendment, while it does apply to previous pandemic amendments, I was just up defending the idea that this bill should be kept together after all, because there is an important overarching theme of the bill in terms of how we restart our recovery. But this amendment does actually apply to the benefits listed in the bill as well. And so I think it's not quite fair to say that it's out of scope or that it doesn't legitimately touch on the issues already raised within the bill. And it's for that reason that I would contest your ruling, Mr. Chair, and ask that the committee have the opportunity to have a recorded division if and when there's no further discussion on this in order to test the will of the committee in respect to your ruling.
Thank you, Mr. Blakey. Is there any further discussion? Ms. Zarowitz.
If I could just ask a question, Mr. Chair. If you have deemed it inadmissible, and if by chance this committee votes in favor of this motion moving ahead with the bill, could whether it's you or through the clerk, maybe that we could ask the clerk, what happens when it gets to the floor? Is it something that the speaker just automatically says, well, it was inadmissible, so it's not going to be considered part of the bill? If I could maybe through you ask the clerk if he could respond to that question.
We have clerks. I don't know if it's
sorry.
legislative clerk. It's Philip.
Oh,
so
sorry.
Philippe,
Whoever
yes,
can answer that question.
will be helping us with that answer. Philippe?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. To your question, if an amendment is ruled inadmissible in committee and a challenge is put forward and the amendment eventually is adopted, somebody could be raising a point of order in the chamber to basically alert the speaker that there is an inadmissible amendment in the report. If the speaker decides that the amendment is indeed inadmissible, he could take the amendment out of the report, ask for a new reprint of the bill, and the amendment would be taken out from the bill. In this instance, there is two parameters that come in play. There is the out of scope, but there's also the needs for royal recommendation. So those are two different aspects of things. And on the royal recommendation, the speaker could do it on his own volition without point of order.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Thank you. Now on the speakers, I've got Monsieur Samari and then Mr. Chambers.
Thank you very much, Chair. Mr. Mela, follow up. Assuming what you've just said were to happen, are we talking about a delay that could happen in an hour or two, or will it take days of delays if the report does go to the Speaker of the House and he makes his decision and the bill is reprinted? Because obviously what concerns me here is that we'll be sitting only until Friday of this week, and I would like to have this bill be voted on by Friday. Thank you.
Yes, Philippe, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Merci, Monsieur San.
Thank you very much, Mr. Saint-Marie. That's a very good question. I don't really have an answer for you right now because it'll depend somewhat on how busy the law clerk of the House is, and also the Speaker, also with other questions of privilege or point of order, how busy he is. So it may hit the floor of the House tomorrow, but it's hard to say. It may take one day or perhaps until Wednesday. It really varies, so I can't give you a specific answer with certainty.
Mr. Chambers?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We heard testimony from a number of government officials, in particular the Minister of Finance, noting that they are well aware of this issue. I think the amendment by Mr. Blakey is quite reasonable and addresses a well-known issue that we could fix here this evening, unless, of course, there is someone on the government side that is suggesting that there's another bill coming up, tomorrow that will deal with this issue. I think it's reasonable to consider this amendment.
Okay, so I think so we take this to the clerk for a vote on the challenge to the chair's ruling.
So the question is, shall the ruling of the chair be sustained? If you are in favor of the ruling of the chair, you vote yes. If you are against the ruling of the chair, you vote no. Mr. Baker?
In favor.
Mr. Beach?
Yes.
Mr. Chahal?
Yes.
Mr. Derowitz?
En faveur.
Mr. McDonald?
In favor.
Mr. Chambers?
Overturn?
Mr. McLean?
Opposed.
Mr. Polyev?
Overturn.
Mr. Stewart?
Overturn.
Monsieur Sainte-Marie?
En faveur.
Mr. Blakey?
No.
Yeas pour 6, nays contre 5.
Okay. So it's, just Phyllis? So just to allow members and Mr. Blakey know that because it was defeated, so it was upheld, the ruling of the chair. That also applied as far as my ruling to NDP 2, so it would affect NDP 2. So that takes us now down to we are at, is this at clause 1? Yes, clause 1. If there are any other amendments to clause 1. No, yes, that's our next NDP
in
3.
clause 1.
Yes, Mr. Blakey.
Okay.
Yeah, NDP 3.
Would you like me
yes,
to move
would you
ahead
like
with
to
that
speak
then?
to it? Yes, please.
Sure. So this amendment and its sister amendment, NDP 4, are with a view to ensuring that one of the issues that has come up again and again in respect of the wage subsidy, which is that a number of companies availed themselves of wage subsidy support, but clearly didn't need it because they were paying massive dividends to their shareholders. We've seen the clawback of benefits from people on the financial margins, but these companies that were clearly in a position to reward their shareholders have not seen any kind of comparable effort, in fact, any effort at all, to recover public funds that they took and didn't need. And so the point of these amendments is to ensure that there is an effort to try and recover money from companies that clearly didn't need that public support, and that going forward there doesn't continue to be this phenomenon of companies being able to access funds, make a profit, and then pay those public funds out to their shareholders rather than reimburse them to the government. So the mechanism is a lot like what was landed on in respect of executive compensation, but it would apply in this case to dividends as well. And the proposal here is that it apply retroactively. to the beginning of the pandemic and the paying out of these benefits.
There's some further discussion. Mr. Chambers, yes?
Question for my colleague and perhaps the drafters, just to clarify, is the restriction that you do not pay dividends or had not paid dividends during the period of time for which you received the support, or is it that you did not pay dividends for the entire period starting in March until now?
Well, like I say, they're similar to the executive compensation amounts, except that they go backwards. So whereas the way that mechanism worked, in my understanding for executive compensation, was that any amount that was paid out in executive compensation from the go-forward date would be repaid back to government from the amount that they took in wage subsidy. So the idea is that would be happening on a go-forward basis. So if you received a certain amount, call it X, and then you received and then you paid out an executive compensation amount Y, you would be paying that back to government because it was obviously something that wasn't required. If you were able to pay out $100 million in dividends to your shareholders, that was $100 million of wage subsidy that you did not require. That would mean that they have to find that money elsewhere, either in cash holdings or in the market. But it's our opinion that companies that were able to pay out that kind of dividend in these circumstances will be able to find a way to pay that money back, and therefore don't need to continue to have benefited from public funds in that amount.
And I've got Mr. McLean would like to speak to this.
Yeah, with respect to trying to support the amendment here, if I can ask Mr. Blakey, there are certain entities, of course, that required funding to keep their employees under CEWS during a period where there was no income coming in, and have subsequently obviously turned their fortunes around, but would not have survived had they not had the support from government during a very trying time at the beginning of the pandemic. So if the intent is only to use it on a go-forward basis when companies were solvent and may have still be trying to access government programs, I think that intent is clear and I think is clearly supportable. But if those programs had not been there at a certain point in time, those companies would not exist now, and we'd be more beholden to foreign companies doing that work. So if we can clarify that in the language and in the intent, I think you get a good amount of support from around the table.
Sure. I mean, I think one of the things that is true is that those companies that did need that assistance at a particular time in the pandemic, I mean, that's not when they paid the dividend, right? So they paid the dividend once they come out on the other side. Those companies are now out on the other side. And so they're, I think, very likely in a position to repay, even if that means getting some kind of financing in the market in the meantime in order to make taxpayers whole for some of the amount that they didn't need. Of course, this amendment doesn't cover share buybacks. That was something that we looked at. That was a complicated legislative amendment, and it wasn't something that House drafters were able to do under the time constraints that we had. And there were a number of questions about how that would be implemented. So this was what we could develop for now. But I mention it simply because there were other indications, like share buybacks, that those companies didn't need that money and where that public money was used for other purposes. This doesn't reclaim that, seeing as dividends are only a portion of what some of these companies were able to do with taxpayers' money. I think it's reasonable to ask that they would repay that money. I think of the Royal Ottawa Golf Club, for instance. There was some media coverage of them. They received about $1 million in wage subsidy money, if memory serves. It may not. The article is out there. And they ended up with about the same in a windfall. They decided to repave their parking lot 3 years ahead of plan in their capital plan. I mean, that's, to me, pretty obvious that they were, even though they needed it in the early months of the pandemic, they received that money, then had a pretty good season, and then would be in a position to repay that money. So that's why I think that this isn't a lot to ask in terms of retroactivity. again, in keeping with the spirit of some of my comments last day, I recognize that one vote is not enough to pass an amendment at committee. If this could garner majority support by removing the retroactivity piece, well, I think that would be too bad. I would rather see the protection exist on a go-forward basis than not exist at all. I am disappointed that the government, as I mentioned with the minister while she was here, didn't avail itself of the opportunity to put those kinds of protections in here, not just around dividends, but also share buybacks. These kinds of things are always much easier when the government is willing to do some of that homework. We're sharing a small drafting unit among 338 MPs. They've got departments with inside legal counsel that can do a lot of their drafting. And some of these issues are complex. There's no question about it. But I just don't think that's an excuse for inaction. So I would like to see something productive come out of tonight's meeting that would at least shield Canadians against future instances of the kind of grab of taxpayers' money that we saw under the wage subsidy program. Totally recognizing that, a lot of this money was legitimately used. I'm not trying to say that there weren't a lot of companies who availed themselves quite rightly of the wage subsidy program. We were early advocates for that program. When the government announced a 10% wage subsidy program, we teamed up with the CFIB, not usually best friends of New Democrats, in order to call for a 75% wage subsidy. But all along, we also called for protections to make sure that this money wasn't going to be received from companies that were ultimately going to do well and have no mechanism for getting it back. So this is at least trying to shoehorn that in there. We didn't have normal committee processes in the early days of Parliament, so there wasn't an opportunity for a party to kind of independently bring an amendment in the way that I'm doing that now. And so, as I say, interested in making more progress rather than less, and recognizing that I can't do that as an individual member of the committee. So certainly if you have a concrete proposal for how we might make this amendment more palatable to a majority of committee members, I'm all ears.
Beach, I am being cognizant of time. We're at 9 minutes from the vote. I have Mr. Beach and Mr. McLean. So Mr. Beach and then Mr. McLean, I saw your hand up again. Yes? Okay. Mr. Beach.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd seek your guidance. I'm prepared to speak on NDP Clause 3. I'm also prepared to speak on NDP Clause 4. The conversation has kind of commented on both. I presume I'm only speaking on NDP Clause 3 at this time.
I apologize, Mr. Beach. I was just checking on the time for the vote. We're at 7 minutes from the vote. I think at this time we're going to suspend so that we can get up to our vote, and then we will be back. Thank you. I called the meeting back to order, and we were last discussing NDP 3, and on the speakers list I had Mr. Beach. You were up, and then Mr. Chambers, then Mr. McLean again. I think would like to speak. Yeah, Mr. Beach.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just before we departed for the vote, I was seeking your clarification. There has been talk around both NDP 3 and NDP 4. I'm prepared to speak to both of them. I'd seek your guidance as whether I should speak to NDP 3 now and hold off on speaking to NDP 4, or if I should address both at this present time.
From the legislative clerk, Philippe, just number 3.
Okay. So this motion, as intended, makes the executive compensation provisions, which are now in place, retroactive to March 15th, 2020 for the emergency wage subsidy. Some concerns around that has been reflected by some other members around this table. The first and most obvious concern is the substantial legal risk that the government would incur by changing the terms of the program after it has already been accessed by Canadian companies. Notably, at the time, companies would have been making these decisions. They would have done so following the rules that existed at the time. While this provision is a good one, and the government obviously agrees with it in principle, that's why we implemented the executive compensation provisions in the first place. Retroactive amendments really should only be made in extremely exceptional circumstances. That could be to reflect a longstanding interpretation of the law, clarity of a policy that is clear from previous relevant provisions, or maybe a change that corrects an ambiguous or deficient provision. But in addition to this kind of overarching principle with regards to retroactivity, there are also substantial number of technical deficiencies with the proposal, which would likely require more time to work through than we have provided for in this meeting. The tightness of the timing of this bill is regrettable, but I think we all understand the importance of getting these supports and making them available to Canadians before the House rises. For these reasons, I would encourage members to vote against this amendment. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Beach. I've got Mr. Chambers, then Mr. McLean.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, it is unique to retroactively ask folks to repay a benefit that we don't believe, or some of us don't believe that they should have received, and that's exactly why it's appropriate. Frankly, it's unconscionable that the government subsidized the share prices of a lot of publicly traded corporations by letting them unfairly access the wage subsidy when they had financial capacity to continue paying dividends, repurchase shares, and increase executive compensation. So with that being said, I think it would be entirely appropriate to consider moving away from retroactivity if we could get agreement on a go-forward basis. I think that is something that would be very amenable to certainly our side. I believe my colleague will speak to a potential amendment at this point. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Chambers, Mr. McLean.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Chambers. And I do propose that we strike out the last part of the second part of the amendment here, where C2, NDP 3, the B, if we can strike that out, because there is a problem with retroactivity. So if we took out the retroactive clause there with the subsection 18.1 is deemed to have come into force on March 15th, 2020, I would propose that to my colleague from the New Democratic Party, that would allow, I think the intent of that would be clear, that companies cannot access the benefits if they are dividend paying or paying dividends or increasing the payouts to their executives. We would like to have language in it that includes share buybacks as well, because it's all about income distribution one way or another. And access to these programs should not be benefiting shareholders at the expense of taxpayers. I think we all agree on that, and I think it's a flaw in the initial bill that went through that we have that. Nevertheless, there are companies that follow the rules and applied those rules to make sure that they survived that period. So in a retroactivity, the programs were not alone at that point in time. The programs were, here's a program to make sure you hang on to your employees and that your employees have the sustenance required. And some of those companies have since emerged as dividend-paying companies. So I want to make sure that the timing on this is very clear, that we're talking about the go-forward plan and no retroactive element involved in this that would require all kinds of financial statement restatements and all kinds of public market shenanigans that would happen at that point in time. But I do appreciate very much the intent of the bill as far as matching revenues with expenses here. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So if I can propose that as a friendly amendment.
Okay. Further discussion on the amendment? Don?
I am prepared to accept having that amendment moved. I think normally you need permission from the person presenting the amendment to have an amendment moved, which is particularly important in majority government situations where government majorities on committee might otherwise hollow out opposition amendments. But I'm quite happy to offer that permission so that we might come to a mutually agreeable solution in respect to this amendment.
Mr. Blakey, we would have to vote on the amendment of your NDP 3. Yes. Ms. Zarowitz.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chair. I was going to call you Mr. Fonseca, but I'm sorry, Mr. Chair. But could we just go through that amendment again? Just I want to make sure that we're clear on what it is being proposed.
Okay, if that could be, clerk, have you received it? No, we have not received. So, Mr. McLean, we would need to receive. One of the members, Ms. Zarowitz, would like to go through the amendment of NDP 3's amendment. So the sub-amendment to the amendment.
And just to be clear, we're on clause 1, line 21 on page 11. Is this correct?
Well, if I may, Mr. Chair, this amendment seeks to. There are two kind of line items addressed in the amendment. There's sub A of the amendment, which adds something after line 21, and sub B of the amendment, which adds something after line 30. And I believe Mr. McLean's amendment addresses sub B by essentially deleting sub B. So all that would remain is the part that adds after line 21 all of the text in sub A. I hope that's helpful.
And is this on, what page is this on? I'm sorry.
This is on
NDP
page 3.
On page 11 and 12 of the bill.
Thank you.
Oh, page 11 of the bill.
Yeah. The clauses can be rather large. Sure. So, this would, the entire amendment would cause a change on page 11 and on page 12. Mr. McLean's amendment would delete sub B, which is the portion that would make changes to the current page 12. And you'll see at the bottom of the page, it introduces a new sub 24. Subsection 18.1 is deemed to have come into force on March 15, 2020. That's the aspect of the amendment that causes the retroactive application of the new provisions, and that's what Mr. McLean's amendment seeks to delete.
Okay.
Zarowitz, yes?
So basically, what I'm seeing is that you're trying to strike that. That's the proposal on the table, is just to strike this subsection 18.1 is deemed to have come into force. Strike that. And are you saying that's a friendly amendment?
I'm saying that he has my permission to move it, which is required in clause by clause.
Okay.
Any further discussion? Yeah. Monsieur Samani?
Merci.
Thank you. I have a technical question. I'd like to know if the amendment proposed by Mr. McLean is moved and adopted. I would have questions about NDP 3 amendment as modified. So I'm going to wait for us to vote on that amendment before I ask a question about NDP 3 as modified.
The vote, yeah. We'll discuss after the vote, yes. I don't see any further discussion, so this vote is on the sub-amendment of NDP 3. Clerk?
Mr. Baker,
Opposed.
Mr. Beach,
Opposed.
Madame Châtel,
Opposed.
Ms. Derowitz,
Contre.
Mr. McDonald,
Opposed.
Mr. Chambers,
In favor.
Mr. McLean,
In favor.
Mr. Polyev, Mr. Stewart,
In favor.
Monsieur Sainte-Marie,
En faveur.
Mr. Blakey.
In favor.
Yeas pour 6, nays contre 5.
Amendment carries. And now we shall go to NDP 3 as amended, yes. Sorry, I've got Monsieur Samari.
Mr. St. Marie, thank you. Right now, I have questions for the public servants. To the best of your knowledge, I imagine this question would be for the Department of Finance. Did you study, for example, the number of companies that could be targeted by this amendment? My colleague, Mr. Beach, discussed technical issues that should be implemented. What would they be and what would the scope be? That's my question with respect to NDP 3 as modified. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. I can start perhaps with the second part and then turn it over to my colleague Max Baylor, who can speak to the number of public companies that would be affected. As I understand the question, it was to provide a brief overview of some of the technical issues with the amendment that have been identified. Is that correct?
Oui, c'est correct.
Yes, that is correct.
Okay, thank you very much. So, as was already noted, the coming into force rule would have made it retroactive. With no coming into force rule, the default rule would be that it comes into force on royal assent. That would lead to some ambiguity still in terms of when it would apply. For example, whether it would apply to qualifying periods or dividends paid in qualifying periods that end after royal assent, that begin after, whether it applies to dividends paid after. So there are some questions, interpretive questions that remain. On a more substantive basis with the initial proposal, I would note that it applies where subsidiaries of public corporations pay dividends. The policy intent, as I understand it, is to prevent public corporations from paying profits out or retained earnings as dividends to their shareholders. However, it is quite common for groups of public companies, so a public company and its subsidiaries, to move money within the group through the use of intercorporate dividends. And as worded, since it applies only to dividends, it would seem to require repayment of wage subsidy entitlements when there's dividends that move money simply within a group where nothing has been returned to shareholders. I would also note that it presumably, I assume that it is intended to require repayment of the wage subsidy under subsection 2. However, that is not explicit. Rather, it says that no overpayment on account of qualifying entity's liability under this part. This part is Part 1 of the Income Tax Act, which includes a number of other refundable tax credits, which are all done as deemed overpayments of tax, such as the one for journalism organizations and a number of others. And so the lack of specificity does raise questions there. Finally, there are a number of issues. I'll just talk about some of the main ones. It also applies to fixed cumulative dividends on preferred shares. Many corporations that seek to raise capital in the public markets do so through the issuance of preferred shares. And they do that instead of, say, issuing debt. Preferred shares are legally shares, but they have many economic debt-like characteristics, and they tend to pay shares at a fixed rate, just like, or very similar to interest on a debt. And so those are payments that are economically similar to interest and would be caught as well. So to kind of summarize, there would still be questions, at least interpretively, relating to the coming into force of the rule. It could require repayment of the wage subsidy where money is moved around within a corporate group and nothing is actually returned to shareholders. Also, since it applies to dividends paid in the qualifying period, it could lead to a fairly simple way to plan around it, where a public corporation could simply defer the payment of a dividend until right after the end of the qualifying period. The effect of this rule is to not so much require repayment in the same way that the executive compensation rules does, but rather it takes away the initial entitlement, which gets to the same place, but it only applies for a particular period. And so one question would be whether or not, or one likely outcome would be that public corporations seeking to pay dividends but also obtain the wage subsidy could just simply defer the payment of those dividends until after the relevant period and thus avoid the application of the rule. So those are some of the issues that we'd identified. I would turn it over to my colleague, Max Baylor, who can speak to the numbers of corporations that have received the wage subsidy.
In terms of the question as to the number of companies that could be affected, we don't have direct data. We have data in terms of the overall scope. We'll look back for current applications for the wage subsidy. We know the number of companies, public companies, that did receive the wage subsidy. The data doesn't tell us whether they paid dividends or not. But if we just look at the kind of universe of public companies who did receive the wage subsidy, we are talking about a small number, 0.4% in terms of the number of overall employers who, well, with respect to payment, we're talking about 9.6%. That's the overall context. We don't know exactly the number who paid dividends. It's a smaller number. Obviously, if we look at things going forward, as I said, we don't know exactly what the future will look like or who will apply, but historically, it gives you kind of an idea of the number of companies that could be affected in the future.
Thank you, Mr. Baylor. Mr. McGowan, we have on our speakers list now Ms. Zarowitz, Mr. Chambers, and then Mr. Blakey.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I didn't know if Mr. Marif had finished his questions. He might not have, and I don't want to
Oui,
interrupt.
j'avais.
Yes, I had finished my question. I'll have other questions and comments after, but I'd like to thank Mr. McGowan and Mr. Baylor for their specific answers. Thank you.
Merci. Ms. Zerowitz.
Okay, thank you so much, Mr. Chair. So I'd like have a couple of questions for finance officials as well. So this whole bill is about urgently getting money to hard-hit industries and workers within those hard-hit industries, and in particular tourism, recreation, and many in the arts and culture sector. So my question is, and I don't know if this is to you, Mr. McGowan, or if there's someone else who can better respond to that. If this amendment as proposed is passed, what would be the impact of this amendment on the program as a whole? So would it delay in any way supports getting to the workers or to the businesses that need them? So that's part one. And my second part is would this amendment in any way actually penalize any businesses or corporations from legitimately doing business, so in a legitimate way? Those are my two questions.
Thank you for your questions. So maybe starting with your second question first. As noted, there's a concern that because the rules apply to all dividends and not just dividends paid on the publicly listed shares, they could require repayment of the wage subsidy where one entity in a corporate group is moving funds to another entity in the corporate group for the group's purposes and not actually returning any amounts to shareholders. That's a very common way for public companies and large corporate groups to move money around and ensure that funds are in the correct legal entity. Likewise, it could adversely affect corporations that have issued preferred shares as part of their corporate financing programs. And I think those are probably the two largest. In terms of what impact the amendment would have on the administration and enforcement of the rules, of course, the Canada Revenue Agency has been working tirelessly to put these structures and programs in place in order to implement these new measures contained in Bill C2. And so any change to them could require the Canada Revenue Agency to tweak its systems. And while I don't know, I'm not involved in the development of the Canada Revenue Agency's IT systems, that does seem to be a risk. Conversely, public corporations could be required to proceed with the rules without necessarily having full certainty as to how they are intended to apply. For example, whether it applies to the qualifying period that ends after the date of royal assent or before or whatnot. So that there would be those concerns. Unfortunately, I don't know enough about the Canada Revenue Agency's technical systems to advise or to opine on whether or not they would need to be redesigned, but that is something that I think we'd want to check.
Mr. McGowan, before you go to answer my second question or someone else within the finance department, I just want to be clear. I like putting things into plain language. So my understanding, because I have to always put into terms I understand, my understanding on your first point was there's a legitimate reason why a number of corporations might actually move money around that would be seen as dividends moving around, but it has nothing to do with actually sort of giving dividends is what the intention of this motion, I think, is to say if there are dividends that are given out to shareholders, that company should not be receiving the wage subsidy. So you're saying there's legitimate reasons to actually sort of move dividends within companies. That's a normal sort of course of business, and they do it for a number of different reasons in everyday work. And so that's the first part. The second part you're saying is there's also some technical things that CRA might have to change if this amendment actually passes. And so we don't quite know how easy or not easy that it will be for CRA to do.
That's absolutely correct. I, of course, would not speak on behalf of the Canada Revenue Agency for their IT and their systems requirements, but I certainly know that they've been working tirelessly on implementing the systems required to get the mechanisms under the bill. Maybe if it would be helpful for clarifying things, I always find it easy or best to think of concrete examples. So let's say you have a public corporation that has two subsidiaries. One subsidiary operates in one market, another subsidiary in another. One of the subsidiaries is doing a little bit better. It has some extra retained funds, so it could pay a dividend tax-free up to the parent company and allow the parent company to contribute those extra funds to the other subsidiary to help it weather the whatever crises or issues it's facing, maybe pay off some of its receivables or wages. And that's the type of movement within a group that I was referring to.
And I guess my second question was just if this amendment went through, would there be a delay in supports getting to the workers and or corporations that would need them?
I'm not, as I noted, I'm not certain whether or not the Canada Revenue Agency, like what kind of delays in the delivery of the programs this would lead to with the CRA systems. I'm sorry, I don't know that.
No, thank you. I appreciate the response. I now understand. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mr. Chambers.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just perhaps might help to simplify. There is already a restriction in this bill for companies that choose to pay executive compensation or increase executive compensation. The challenges with someone gaming the system, as just mentioned by our a well-informed official about paying dividends after the period is over. I mean, the same exact criticism could also apply to the share repurchases. I think that this amendment now, that it is not retroactive, at least provides a significant amount of time for CRA officials to do what they have done plenty of times previously, is to draft an interpretive note on how it will interpret this section, so that it will cause any public company who's asking for government funds to subsidize its wages to think very hard about the choices that it's going to make before it asks and receives government funding. And so we have the executive compensation restriction. I think it is an incredibly reasonable amendment, and now it's sub-amendment for on a go-forward basis, gives companies well in advance time to plan and think very hard before they take public funds. Thank you.
Mr. Chambers, Mr. Blakey.
Thank you. One of the things that low-income families and low-income seniors will do when they have a surplus in their account is they'll transfer it to the grocery store to buy groceries. They may transfer it to a mechanic to fix their car. They may transfer it to creditors in order to pay down their debt or to cover interest. I guess it's too bad they can't call that a dividend payment, eh? Wouldn't that be nice? And maybe they'd have more champions around this table. But they can't. And that didn't stop the government from having very strong opinions about whether it was appropriate for them to have taken pandemic benefits in the first place or not, particularly if they received the Canada Child Benefit or the Canada Worker Benefit or the Guaranteed Income Supplement. Nobody said, well, hey, let's call it a dividend and call it a day. They said, let's take the money back. In fact, and if we're going to fix it up at all, we're going to do it after having dragged it out for months. And some of them are living in their cars. Others are living on the street. Others have eviction notices coming up while they try and pay for their medication and figure out what it is they're going to do as winter sets in. So maybe we need to look as a committee at how we could classify the essential transfers of seniors to get the essentials that they need as dividends so that they could have the same protections that these large companies seem to have. I think that's maybe something we should mark down for work on the agenda of this committee on a rather urgent basis. I would say it was very nice to get a technical answer from department officials. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, these are the same officials that were here earlier in the week, or last week, pardon me. It is blending all together. It's been a lot of meetings. And I felt like I got a more clear technical answer about my own amendment than I did about the bill that they helped design for the government. I'm going to have to spend some time reflecting on that. I hope they will too, because the kind of technical response that they came prepared to give today is exactly the kind of technical response we've been demanding of them for well over 14 hours now on the bill that they helped draft. So now we know they're capable of it. That's a new discovery as of tonight. If this amendment is served to do nothing else, it's to prove that departmental officials actually are a lot smarter than they sometimes give themselves credit for at this committee. And I hope that we see a commitment going forward to them continuing to show this kind of competence as we continue to ask questions. I would say also that I just don't accept the arguments about this is a rush job. I mean, come on. We had an election, and how long did it take for Parliament to come back? You know, so it's no secret at this table. I'm a member of the Fourth Party. We got 25 seats in Parliament. That's not news to anybody. We got a government that says they actually agree with the principle of the amendment. Why is it me trying to draft the amendment through the House of Commons drafters without any of the technical expertise of the department when the government members say they're on board? It's not like I was in the room and said, no, don't put that in there, and then I changed my mind. They knew about this. In fact, this committee in the last Parliament made recommendations on this very issue. So it's a little rich to hear from government members that they're on board and if only we had more time. They controlled the time. They drafted the bill. So no more crocodile tears around here. Thank you very much on questions of timing or technical expertise. I'll continue to do the best job I can with the resources that I have, and New Democrats will continue to ask Canadians to give us more resources at election time so that this kind of dog and pony show is no longer the rule, but just the exception. So all that said, I have a question for the officials. If we were to pass this amendment, and if the companies that were applying for wage subsidy support on a go-forward basis were to get a letter explaining to them the very things that departmental officials explained today at the table, they would have the information they needed in order to make an informed decision, as Mr. Chambers rightly pointed out. Would they not also be getting more notice about the implications of their application for pandemic health than seniors on the guaranteed income supplement received when they applied in good faith to the CERB and were not notified that that would come later out of their guaranteed income supplement? Is it fair to say that they'd be getting more notice? That's a yes or no. Nice crisp answer, please. I am prepared to answer the question as well if departmental officials aren't sure which one to choose or they don't have a coin to flip.
I can provide a short answer, and that is that the Canada Revenue Agency has been developing guidance on rules, and of course, with any amendment or in the bill, they would continue to do so that taxpayers are apprised of their rights and obligations through the bills that are enacted by Parliament. In terms of relative comparison between the amounts of information under these wage subsidy or what was provided under the GIS, I'm not familiar enough with those other programs to say or to provide a real comparison.
Alas, I fear the moment of clarity has passed. May it soon return. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
And incidentally, Mr. Chair, I'm sorry. The answer is yes. They would be getting more notice than seniors on the guaranteed income supplement got when they applied in good faith, just in case there was any doubt in the minds of any members around the table.
Thank you, Mr. Blakey. I've got Mr. McLean, Monsieur Sainte-Marie. I think Mr. Poliev, had you raised your hand also? Yes, and so Mr. McLean.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. I find myself squished here because I totally agree with the intent of Mr. Blakey's motion here, and I also know Mr. McGowan's explanation of why we need to tighten this up is very succinct. Preferred shares are not shares to common equity, and we are looking at distribution of common equity shares, so we can probably tighten that language. So it is dividends payable on common equity. That is dividends that corporations choose to pay to shareholders. Let's recall what's happened here throughout CERB is a transfer of wealth from certain parts of society to certain other parts of society. And it is a gross imbalance between asset holders that are getting incredibly wealthy through this process and people without assets. So to not continue to fund the transfer of wealth from regular Canadians to rich Canadians is exactly what the intent of this motion should be. And I think we need to find wording to make sure that that applies. Now, Mr. McGowan, I will say we will talk about common equity because we know that preferred equity is actually you're required like a debt instrument, if you will, at that point. And we also understand that some of these dividends are transferred between different arms of the same corporation, and there's no payout, if you will. It is only a transfer mechanism. It is not a distribution from the corporation to its shareholders. So I think we can tighten up that language, and I would encourage Mr. McGowan to submit something because he understands the intent here that would tighten that accordingly so we don't continue with this wealth transfer, which is exactly what Canadians are tired of seeing, is that we're paying attention to their wealth here, to their taxes, and we're not just flushing it into the system. Sorry, Mr. Baker, for using that word again. And, pushing up inflation, pushing up the wealth of Canadians and the asset inflation that's occurred over the last year and a half here without anybody minding the store. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. McLean. And then we've got Monsieur Saint-Marie, and then Mr. Poliev, and then Madame Chatel.
Je commencerai avec.
I'll start with a point of order, Chair. I agree entirely with the suggestion of my colleague, Mr. McLean. Would we have a new sub-amendment with more specific rephrasing? That's my question. And then I will speak more generally later about the NDP 3 amendment as modified.
Same point of order, if I might, Mr. Chair, just on
Point of order?
On that point of order. One of the options that might be available to the committee, if a member who had the floor, who wasn't speaking on a point of order, might see fit to move it, would be to table this amendment till the end and have a legislative drafter in the interim try and find that wording so that we could return to this at the end of clause by clause and carry on with the other amendments for consideration in the meantime.
Thank you, Mr. Blakey. And so we had Mr. McLean on. Now we've got Monsieur Saint-Marie. Are you?
Oui, je propose.
Yes. I would like to support the proposal of my colleague to come back to this amendment at the end of this session with the appropriate rephrasing so that we can achieve our objective that we have set out in this amendment.
Philip is going to explain what can be done and what can't be done.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Blakey and Monsieur Sainte-Marie, je me rapproche du micro.
I'm getting closer to the mic so the interpreters can hear us better. The problem that arises is that we simply can't set aside one amendment and put the entire section aside. So NDP 3 and then NDP 4 have to be considered in that order.
Merci.
Thank you for that technical answer. So we could proceed like this. We could table Article 1 with the amendments, and then at the end of the session we could rephrase NDP 3 as modified which better defines what we mean by the dividends paid to shareholders. Thank you.
The legislative clerk is asking, are you requesting someone to draft this?
Oui, et
Yes. Perhaps my colleague, Mr. Blakely, and Mr. McLean and the clerk could work on this so that we could have a more specific definition. I see Mr. Mela is shaking his head no.
Oui, je secoue.
I vigorously am shaking my head no because I am not a legislative writer. I see that it is 8:03 p.m. I do not believe that there is a legislative writer who is listening to us. It'll be hard to find one at this time who will be available this evening. We do need one, also a translator, and all the clerks and all the personnel that go with that to do such a task. I believe I have colleagues that want to speak to this. So since I'm not a specialist in this area, I will leave them the floor and I'll go back to my questions later. Thank you.
Okay, we've got Monsieur or Mr. Poliev. I think he's conferring. I'll move to Madame Châtel.
Thank you very much, Chair. The amendment, as proposed, well, I understand that you want to make changes to it, but in every company, there are different classes of shares. Some have set revenue with benefits and pension funds. We can't have that. For ordinary shares, you can receive dividends on them, but when, as Mr. McGiver says, we have to make sure it's the final shareholder because the funds go from one company to another, and a company can be composed of several entities, and they can transfer their funds from one company to another for cash needs and business needs. So there are corporate dividends, and that's on ordinary shares. So even with an amendment like Mr. McLean is proposing, just on these types of dividends on ordinary shares, will create an issue. I hope you understand that correctly. It would be a big problem for companies who are not doing anything wrong. They're just taking care of operations and their business. But because they're doing the same operations, we have to ask them to repay the wage subsidy. It doesn't make sense. Thank you, Chair.
See,
Thank you very much.
Mr. Poliev.
Well, I think we're seeing the results of the government trying to ram this legislation through. And they shut the place down for 6 months to call an unnecessary election, and then even after that election was over, they took another 60 days to get back to work. And now they're saying we don't have enough time to pass the legislation. So it's like they're like the teenager who says, Mom, how could you expect me to study for the exam in just one night? And Mom says, well, actually, you knew that there was going to be an exam a month ago. You chose to start studying the night before. So this is the problem the government has created. There are a couple of options to fix it. One is to extend our work on this committee on this bill, so we don't have to report back. We could adopt another motion to report the bill back later in the week if the government is not satisfied. Or two, we can just pass Mr. Blakey's amendment. And so if either the government will agree to the first option or we're going to agree to the second one. So that's we will be supporting Mr. Blakey, and the government will have to, if the government is not happy with the rush job that the government has forced on the committee, then they will have to find a solution to that problem. Thank you.
Thank you. I wasn't sure who. Mr. Chambers, Ms. Zarowitz.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have full support and confidence that the officials, both appearing here this evening and those at CRA, will be able to clarify any vagueness or ambiguity in legislation well before any company chooses whether they want to avail themselves of wage subsidy. And so since we are on a go-forward basis, I think this is an incredibly reasonable compromise and gives people a significant amount of time with their own lawyers and their own advisors to think before they avail themselves of the subsidy. And as I say, I believe there is significant time, and I have full confidence in our officials to put out an interpretive note to the effect of the discussion here this evening. Thank you.
Thank you.
Point of order, Mr. Chair. Mr.
Yeah. Oh, Mr. Beach. Yeah.
Hi,
I have.
thank you.
Sorry, I didn't see your hand. I have Ms. Zerowitz and then yourself, Mr. Beach.
Oh, on a point of order?
Oh, and a point of order. Sorry, I didn't hear point of order. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just have a brief point of order. I apologize. I've been really enjoying the discussion among members. I came in straight from another meeting into this meeting, and of course the vote in between. And it's been 2 hours and 10 minutes. Could I ask for a 5-minute suspension just for a brief bio break?
Okay. We'll suspend for 5 minutes. Yep, sorry.
I just talked.
Philip would like to inform the committee just in terms of drafting a new amendment.
So, Mr. Blakey and Mr. Sainte-Marie, to my great surprise, the Office of the Law Clerk is actually listening to us.
Oh,
So,
hey.
so it would be, when I say possible, it depends on the complexity of the request. But if you could send the request to, you can send it to whoever was the drafter for your amendment, and they could take it from there. And communicate with you if they are able to do it tonight, which, Isabelle de Souza, if you want to contact her, or Nathalie Caron, or you can send it to me and I'll send it to them, either.
Sure, that sounds great.
And, but there's no guarantee that they can do it tonight. They will bring people in to see how complex the request is. And if it's possible, of course, they'll do it. Otherwise, it may go to tomorrow.
I have Ms. Zarowitz and then Mr. McLean.
Okay. Boy, things change fast around here. So look, I'll just address a couple of points that I think Mr. Polyev made, and I'll just say, look, we know that the drafting of these emergency supports because of COVID does happen at the last minute. And so I don't want anybody who might be listening to think that we're trying to pull the wool over anybody's eyes. I believe that this is a very good piece of legislation that is trying to get emergency supports to hard-hit industries, to companies, and to individuals. I will also say that there's nobody, and I would say that for sure on our side, and I would bet you around the table, that want any corporation to be able to give out dividends to shareholders while they're collecting any type of public funds like emergency supports, like the Canada Emergency Wage Subsidies. Saying all of that, I do think it's very dangerous for us to be amending the tax code without legal interpretation and without help. So I just really caution us in terms of doing this. It's great that now we have a law clerk that's listening in. I would like to suggest, Mr. Chair, if I can, that maybe we could table this until 9:30, because I think we have a hard stop at 10 o'clock. So maybe if we could table this until 9:30, and maybe there could be some suggestions that are sent through to whomever, so that maybe we can come back with maybe something that all of us could perhaps live with or consider. Would that be amenable?
Thank you, Ms. Zarowitz. Mr. McLean.
Hold on, I asked a question.
About tabling the...
Well, tabling until 9:30, in which case then we would come back. So I think there would be, I think we have a couple of suggestions. I think the other side might have some suggestions. I just want to give a very clear time frame. If we are going to get this bill passed this week, we have to be able to do it this evening. Full stop. We have to be able to get through clause by clause this evening and be happy with the bill and be able to sort of finish it tonight if it's going to pass this week. And if we're going to ensure that businesses don't go out of business, if we're going to ensure that workers don't go broke, and if we're going to ensure that our economy continues to sustain itself.
Thank you, Ms. Zarowitz. We've got Mr. McLean and then Mr. Blakey.
Thank you.
I'm not getting an answer, though. Is there an agreement that they'll come back?
Well, there would have to be a decision made by the entire committee.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yeah. Mr. McLean, Mr. Blakey.
Let me put it to Mr. McGowan, and the subject to acquiescence by my colleague around the table. If we threw in the if in the qualifying period it paid taxable dividends on common equity, would that adequately capture anything exempt from any corporate dividends that I presume are mostly untaxable, and any preferred dividends or any other situation you see we're not trying to affect here?
Thank you for the question. I think I would ask the or direct a question to the chair or perhaps the parliamentary secretary. I just want to be sure about my role appearing before this committee. My understanding was that it is to provide technical advice on the contents of the bill and the amendments. And I just want to make sure that I would not be acting inappropriately if I were to be providing drafting advice as part of this committee hearing.
Yes, Mr. McGowan, that is correct. You here for technical advice. Yeah, and we have Mr. McLean. Yeah. A technical question.
The technical
yes,
question was, if that was the wording, would it apply to common equity that's distributed to shareholders only, or are there other instances that might get caught that he hasn't completely brought to the table here at this point?
Point of order, Mr.
Point of
Chair.
order, Ms.
And just with all due respect to my colleague, I think that the question was asked whether or not, Mr. McGowan asked whether or not he should be providing some advice, and he's here just for technical. He's not here to draft. I also just want to point out...
Ms. Durr, it's a technical question.
I think it's moved beyond that, Mr. McLean. I wanted to call you Greg, but I'll call you Mr. McLean. I think it's moved beyond that. I think we're asking for advice, and I think that Mr. McGowan's asking the question because he's kind of feeling a little uncomfortable. So
yeah, Mr. McGowan is here for technical advice, Mr. McLean.
But in my opinion, it is a technical question. I'm asking if there's anything, if we put that wording there, is there any instance that he doesn't see covered in what our wording is?
Point of order. Officials are here to talk about the draft presented in front of us, right? They cannot answer hypothetical draft that are not in front. And I know that because in drafting, to answer sort of question in the hypothesis without having looked at the draft, really the implication on corporate structures, they cannot answer because they haven't prepared for that.
Point d'ordre, Monsieur le Président.
Point of order, Chair. If I understand correctly, we're adopting this soup sub-amendment proposed by Mr. McLean, and then we can ask Mr. McGowan what exceptions would be applied. If I understand that correctly, let's just move forward with that, quite simply. Thank you.
Sorry, I cannot hear everything, Monsieur Samadi.
Mr. St. Marie, what I was saying is that if I understand correctly, the proposal of Mr. McLean, well, we should adopt it as a sub-amendment, and then we can ask questions, technical ones, to Mr. McGowan on the sub-amendment that we can adopt, and then we'll have answers to our questions. If that's the procedure, let's move forward and ask our questions in a few minutes, quite simply. Thank you.
Clean, if you can repeat the wording.
Yes, please. On NDP 3, 201 would say, despite subsection 2, no overpayment on account of a qualifying entity's liability under this part for the taxation year in which the qualifying period ends is deemed to have arisen with respect to a qualifying entity that is a publicly traded company or a subsidiary of such a company if, in the qualifying period, it paid taxable dividends on common equity.
Yes, Mr. Polyev.
I think that resolves the problem. Mr. McLean has just clarified that if we are talking about dividends to common shareholders rather than preferred shareholders, that would be covered. But if it does include preferred shareholders, it would not be covered by the amendment proposed. So that should resolve the issue that Mr. McGowan raised earlier. And now we can apply the rule only to companies that pay dividends to shareholders and not companies that pay dividends to their corporate owners. So since we've solved this issue, I imagine that we could have unanimous support, and the Liberals could tell us that they agree with the principle that companies who receive dividends, who pay them rather, should not receive the subsidy. Therefore, we all agree on this, and we should move forward to the vote.
I do have Mr. Blakey on the list, and then Madame Chatel.
Well, thank you. As I said, I mean, I'm in favor of making some progress rather than no progress. I appreciate the efforts of colleagues around the table to try and come to some kind of solution in the time that we have with their own personal expertise. It is the holiday season. I mean, if by some Christmas miracle the government had actually been doing work on this and, say, had an amendment drafted that they would find acceptable that would accomplish these things, wouldn't this ever be a great time for them to bring it to the table? If by some miracle that document happened to exist, then we could consider that amendment. And like I say, Christmas time, anything's possible. You know, I didn't hang a stocking in front of my spot at the committee table here, but had I, maybe such a document would appear here. And if it did, then we might be able to accomplish what everyone says they want to accomplish in a way that would satisfy government officials. If not, I think this is an excellent next option.
Thank you, Mr. Blakey. Madame Chatel.
Look, the Income Tax Act is highly complex. I'll just give you an example. Try to find the definition of common equity in the Income Tax Act. It's not there. Okay?
Serious time constraints, Mr. Chair. I don't know that we have time to undertake that kind of
Right,
research.
Exactly my point. Exactly my point. We don't have time. Who's a tax lawyer? Who's drafting the tax legislation? It's not about redrafting on the fly like this. It's dangerous. It's really dangerous, and it could harm our business. It could harm our taxpayers. We don't want to do that. We want to give service to Canadians, service to businesses. We don't want to create problem for them. So drafting on the fly, it's very dangerous, and it could hurt real people. Think about it.
See, Madame Chatel, I've got Mr. Baker, then Mr. Chambers.
Thanks, Chair. So, je respecte beaucoup l'intention.
I respect enormously the intent of my colleagues, their intention, as they try to solve this issue. In my opinion, there's no disagreement, a major one, about the issue that we're discussing here. This disagreement stems from the solution. And what concerns me, there are potential implications to this amendment, despite the fact that there are good intentions here. So there are implications that we don't understand, and we need to understand this before we make a decision on this amendment. There is the possibility, by trying to solve one issue, we could create an even bigger one for companies that we're trying to help. I'd like to remind my colleagues, well, let's bear in mind, what companies are we talking about? We're talking about companies that have seen a 40 or 50% drop in revenues. These are companies that are suffering. They have to be so to qualify for this program. So a company that loses 40% of its revenues is already a company that's doing everything in its power to stay in business and to help its shareholders and employees. So imagine that such a change, despite our good intentions, causes additional issues for these companies. Imagine that these companies could have benefited from this program, from Bill C2, but now, because of this issue, we've caused something that a problem we don't understand this evening and only later, and will prevent them from taking advantage of these programs. The problem is that, well, I'm not here saying that there's an issue. What I'm saying is that we don't know if there's one. Despite everyone's intelligence and experience around this table, no one here can say with 100% certainty that this won't cause an issue for the companies that we're trying to help and that we want to help. And that is why, despite the fact that this is a positive thing, I think it's very risky to change the language and pass these amendments right now. That's what I wanted to say. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Baker, just before we go to Mr. Chambers, I just spoke to Philippe, our legislative clerk, and so Ms. D'Souza is on pause, just waiting to see if we want her to look at this and start doing any work. So, yeah.
Can I just suggest again that we allow this amendment to be worked on until 9:30 and we continue with the rest of the amendments of this bill and the rest of the clause by clause. So it allows Madame Isabel, I forgot her last name, to be able to work on this. D'Souza.
Yep, yes.
Oh, good
Yeah.
Portuguese name. D'Souza to work on this until 9:30, and that gives us enough time, if that is amenable to my colleagues. If we're truly looking at trying to find a solution and truly looking to get through the clause by clause.
Yeah. Yeah, so, yeah, I've got Mr. Chambers and then Mr. Blakey, and yes, Ms. Zarowitz about tabling this and allowing Ms. D'Souza, but Ms. D'Souza needs a signal that she can start doing that work with the time constraints.
Well, Mr. Chair, can she take that forward before Mr. McGowan says it's technically feasible? It's the question we've been asking.
Ms. D'Souza, can Ms. D'Souza start working on this if Mr. McLean again?
Well, Mr. McGowan should be giving us, like he did the first time, some good input on whether this motion as adjusted holds water in the tax system right now, or whether we're creating a problem, as my friend Mr. Baker has said, for companies that might be able to access this funding and yet are still paying dividends. So I would like that clarity from Mr. McGowan before we instruct Ms. D'Souza to start drafting it.
Thank you, Mr. McLean. I'm not going to speak for Mr. McGowan, but Mr. McGowan is here for technical matters. But I don't know if you have something to say, Mr. McGowan.
Thank you, Chair. I'm, of course, here to provide technical analysis. I'm happy to help out within the scope of what is appropriate, and I will defer to, of course, the Chair's judgment on the scope of that. If it would be appropriate for me to answer the question, I could provide some insight or some thoughts, but again, as Ms. Chattel had noted, this is a process that often has a number of tax lawyers around a table providing input.
So from our legislative clerk, Mr. McLean, what are you looking for?
So let's get it drafted.
Ms. D'Souza to work on.
Yep. So the amendment's there, except for a few words at the end. So it's already been pretty clear. The 3 words: it paid taxable dividends on common equity. So if Ms. D'Souza can work on that, because we're not going to get any more, obviously, technical input on it this evening. That will be that of course is subject to. Yeah. It's a friendly amendment that I'm proposing to Mr. Blakey's motion.
Yes, thank you. A question from the legislative clerk, just for clarity, I guess.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. What I'm being told is rather than working on the words that were added, it would be easier to redraft, to redraft the whole amendment so it fits together in a better way, I guess. So that's what they are doing right now. Is that what the wish of the committee is? Or
I look to Mr. Blakey. Oh, and then Mr. Chambers.
Here,
No, go ahead
first.
by all means.
Here's what I'm open to. We have a sub-amendment that's already been moved by Mr. McLean on NDP 3 to replace the word dividends with the term taxable dividends on common equity. I'm happy to have NDP 3 tabled until 9:30 while the drafters work on a solution, which may well be Mr. McLean's solution. But my understanding is that if the drafters come back with another solution, we'll be able to talk about it and we could vote on that. But if we don't like that solution or they don't come up with another solution, we would still be able to have a vote on Mr. McLean's amendment. So if that's the understanding, then I would accept tabling NDP 3 in that way. I would likewise accept the tabling of NDP 4 in that way if we deem an amendment to have been moved to likewise replace the term dividends in NDP 4 with the same term, taxable dividends on common equity, so that we don't create, when we're voting on the sub-amendment that's already been moved by Mr. McLean, a discrepancy between the two amendments that are obviously meant to go together. If we're tabling NDP 3 and 4 on those terms, so that we still get a vote on the sub-amendment on 3 that Mr. McLean has moved, and what I would take to be a consequent amendment to NDP 4, that's fine. If the drafters come up with something that the committee feels is better, then we can proceed with what they feel is better. As I say, maybe we'll have a Christmas miracle. A man in red will show up with a pre-can amendment. But if not, then we ought to be able to vote on Mr. McLean's amendment. So you can consider me to have moved the appropriate motion, if that's useful, Mr. Chair, and then we could have a vote on tabling under the conditions I've just described.
Thank you, Mr. Blakey. We may have another solution. I'll let the legislative clerk, Philippe, speak to this.
I'm not sure I want to propose that solution anymore, but what I was going to say, no, I'm not going to say it, but what I can tell you is that Isabelle de Souza is already working on it, so she may be able to provide it to us sooner than later, I would say.
In that case, Mr. Chair, I think what I proposed is consistent with Ms. de Souza's contemporary work, and I would propose that we get a decision from the committee on the proposal to table NDP 3 and 4, having deemed an amendment moved to 4, consistent with Mr. McLean's amendment that's already been moved to 3, so that we can revisit this question at 9:30 and have a vote on these amendments if it's the case that we don't get presented with an alternative we feel is superior.
Point of order, Mr. Chair.
Yep. Point of order, Mr. Beach.
So I'm just following along with the logic of the committee members. Could we clarify what exactly would happen at 9:30, assuming we're in the middle of somebody else's amendment? I think we should all be clear on exactly what will happen at 9:30 if this goes ahead.
If I may, I think there's a couple ways that we could proceed, but I think my suggestion would be that the committee simply suspend any debate that it may be having at 9:30 to move back to NDP 3 and 4, and provided that those are disposed with in advance of 10 o'clock, then we would return to whatever debate was suspended at 9:30. If we run out of time, then we would just proceed to a decision on all of whatever remaining business there is, including all the amendments in my package.
All right, Mr. Blakey, you could be a clerk. The clerk says you are correct. Yes. I don't know if I had... Mr. Chambers, did you want to speak to this?
I support Mr. Blakey's amendment. I do think it's worth noting that we've spent far more time figuring out how to protect publicly traded companies with many resources than we did about low-income seniors who are being left out in the cold. So I think there is plenty of time to figure out how we can clarify. Yes, it is unwise to be drafting on the fly. I agree with my honourable colleague, Ms. Chattel. But any issue here is being brought on by the government itself. I mean, it has had ample time since the election has been called to convene Parliament, to convene the committee. This is advice the committee provided to the government in the last Parliament. So I think it should be no surprise that those of us that support the amendment are here asking for it again. I mean, this should really not be a surprise. So I would support Mr. Blakey's suggestion. We come back at 9:30 and we can reconvene then.
Okay, Mr. Blakey, I am looking to the members to see if there's agreement to this. Till tabling till 9:30. Yes. Sure. Yep. Okay. Yep. Okay. There's agreement. So we will jump over number 3, number 4. So Philippe, where do we jump to here? There are no amendments to clauses 2 to 4, so I'm going to ask to see if there is UC to group them and ask if there are any amendments from 2 to 4, clauses 2 to 4. Discussion?
5 would fit in after 4 and before 5. So I have no amendments to propose for clauses 2 to 4.
Okay. Yep. So that so what's being proposed is that there are no amendments that we see right as at this time. Clauses 2 to 4. We're asking for unanimous consent to group
Just
them together.
take a look here, Mr. Chair. Actually,
Assume that government members are supporting clauses 2 to 4. If we had an indication from one other committee member that it was their intent to support them, I would propose that they pass on division.
On division.
On division? Okay, on division.
you know, Mr. Chair, I did have one question. Hopefully, an amendment from the floor. Just be there in a sec. Oh, it's on page 37, and I apologize, this wasn't to you sooner. Page 36 and 37, the Consolidated Revenue Fund. So 41 says all money required to do anything in relation to this act, including all money required by the minister to administer and enforce this act or by the agency, as defined in Section 2 of the Canada Revenue Agency Act, to administer and enforce this act on behalf of the minister, may until March 31st, 2026. Be paid out of the Consolidated Revenue Fund.
Mr. McLean, I just, the legislative clerk has said that we should discuss this, I think, the best at when we get to Clause 18 in the bill.
Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Blakey? Yes.
I just want to make sure that if we do get to 10 o'clock and we're disposing of questions to decide clause by clause, that would be included in the votes that we'll hold. In other words, that it be deemed moved. I'm just looking for a little clarity on that, because it would be a shame if we got to 10 o'clock and because it hadn't been moved because we didn't get to the end of the bill that we didn't get to have a vote on it.
Okay, if we didn't get... If we do get to 10 o'clock, we would put all the clauses forward. There would be no amendments at that time.
Pardon me?
There would be no amendments after 10 o'clock.
But will the amendments in the package, including the amendment that the Conservatives brought today, be deemed, because at 10, like the original motion is that we'll decide all questions in order to dispose of clause by clause. Does that include amendments in the package, or do we have to get to them in order to move them?
Yeah, at 10 o'clock, the question will be put on all the amendments that were received prior to 10 p.m.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Point of order.
I have
Point of order.
I'd just like to have clarification that my amendment, which would amend Part 3.1, I think it's going to become 3.2, has been received, and that amendment would be among the package on which we would vote at 10 p.m. if the time runs out.
Yes, it will. Would you like us to distribute it to the members of the
Yes,
committee?
please.
At this point? Yep.
And a point of order as well, Mr. Chair, if I could make an amendment from the floor.
Point of order, Mr. McLean.
Yeah, if I could make an amendment from the floor on amending Article 41, so Part 18, Clause 18, to change March 31st, 2026 to September 30th, 2025.
That is not possible, Philippe. Go ahead.
Mr. McLean, we have to go in order in which the bill is studied. So is that in clause 18 as well? Or?
I'm bringing that from the floor to make sure it gets on a table for us to discuss the amendment before we stop considering amendments by 10 o'clock.
Mr. Chair, point of order. I'm sorry, you can't move a motion on a point of order. I just feel like we're all over the place right now.
Yes,
so.
Ms. Zerwitz, you are correct.
Okay.
That cannot be done.
No, recognize if I can, please.
Mr. McLean.
Sorry. Do I have the floor, Mr. Chair?
You do.
Thank you. Can I make a motion that we amend Section 18 of the bill so that 41 changes the date from March 31st, 2026 to September 30th, 2025. I'm sorry, 2024, please.
With the clerk.
Would you be able to provide us with a written copy of it, of the amendment?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
Would you be able to provide us with a written copy of the amendments? Because the amendments have to be provided in writing.
Okay, I'll give you that.
Thank you. And any question here?
Piece of paper.
But I have another.
The clerk has a question for you, Mr. Blakey.
Sorry. Just a minute ago, talking about NDP 3 and 4, you indicated that you would have another amendment to NDP 4. Would you have
Yeah, so
the text
in
of that one?
NDP 3, Mr. McLean's amendment replaces the term dividends with the term taxable dividends on common equity.
Yeah.
So what I was proposing in my motion to table NDP 3 and NDP 4 was that an amendment be deemed moved to NDP 4 that would likewise replace the term dividends in NDP 4 with the term taxable dividends on common equity, so that they remain consistent between each other.
Okay, taxable.
Mr. Chair,
Zerwitz.
should we be going clause by clause and maybe sort of considering amendments as we go along, or are we now just gathering all the amendments, looking at all the amendments before we're going clause by clause? Is it possible for us to just continue with the clause by clause and sort of consider amendments as we go along?
Well, we were going clause by clause, but Philippe? Yes.
The only clause that matters is Santa Claus.
Sorry, we were in between clauses since we just stood and clause 1, so we are in between clauses, between clause 1 and the next clause. So the question I had for Mr. Blakey, because somebody has to draft the amendment in the background, and since it wasn't clear that there was another amendment to NDP 4, so that was my question to Mr. Blakey. And Mr. McLean jumped in between to provide another amendment that would be considered after 10 p.m. if we don't get to clause 18 before that.
Just point of order, I don't think we can consider any amendments after 10 p.m.
That is correct. Right, Clerk? Yes, Philippe?
The amendment, that was a question I asked to Mr. Beach 2 days ago, if the amendments in the package would be considered after 10 p.m., and the answer was yes.
Okay. Thank you for that clarification.
So should we, had we already voted on the shall clause 2 to 4, Carrie? Yep. We wanted to group them, yes, by unanimous consent. And I believe we had on division, yes. Okay. So then that takes us to new clause 4.1 NDP 5. And
Mr. Chair, this amendment again addresses the issue of the guaranteed income supplement clawback, but it also introduces language that would prevent the clawback on the Canada Child Benefit in addition to the guaranteed income supplement.
okay. For the discussion, I will, Mr. Blakey, I will now give my ruling. This amendment is inadmissible, and here's my reason for it. So Bill C2 provides for further support in response to COVID-19. The amendment seeks to remove several amounts or benefits from the calculation of taxpayers' income for the purpose of determining their eligibility to benefit that is based on their income when these amounts or benefits are presently taken into account. House of Commons procedure and practice, third edition, states on page 770, quote, an amendment to the bill that was referred to committee after second reading is out of order. It is beyond the scope and principle of the bill. In the opinion of the chair, the amendment is a new concept that is beyond the scope of the bill and which would also require royal recommendation. Therefore, I rule the amendment inadmissible.
If I may, Mr. Chair?
Yes, Mr. Blake.
Thank you. I mean, for reasons that I elaborated earlier, I'm not exactly satisfied with the ruling, but I do recognize that we did already have a challenge to the chair on this point in relation to the benefit clawback. So I don't intend to challenge you again. I think the committee made its will clear on that point.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Mr. Blakey. So from here, clerk. Are we moving to clause 5? And clause 5, we have NDP 6. And that is on page 7 of the package.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. You know, early on in the pandemic, I think many Canadians felt that $2,000 a month or $500 a week really is what it was a very sensible amount. I think anyone who since July, when the government unilaterally kind of reduced the amount from $2,000 to $1,200, a 40% decrease in the amount of the benefit, anyone that's been trying to live on $1,200 a month knows that it's just woefully inadequate. So I think it's important that if the government actually wants to plausibly claim it's trying to deliver meaningful help to people, that the benefit amount correspond to that. And that's why I'm moving this amendment on behalf of the NDP to raise the lockdown benefit amount from $300 a week to $500 a week.
You, Mr. Blakey. And any discussion on this? So I will give you my ruling. This amendment is inadmissible, and here's my reason for it. Bill C2 provides for further support in response to COVID-19 in the amount of $300 weekly as part of the lockdown benefit. The amendment attempts to increase this amount to $500 weekly, a House of Commons procedure and practice, third edition, again, states on page 772. Quote, since an amendment may not infringe upon the financial initiative of the Crown, it is inadmissible if it imposes a charge on the public treasury, or if it extends the objects or purposes or relaxes the conditions and qualifications specified in the royal recommendation, end quote. In the opinion of the chair, the amendment proposes a new superior amount for the lockdown benefit, which imposes a charge on the public treasury higher than the one contemplated in the bill. Therefore, I rule the amendment inadmissible.
And Mr. Chair, if I
Yes,
may.
Mr. Blakey.
I do understand that there is a royal recommendation required for this one. It's a pretty clear-cut case of raising the amount of an expenditure by the Crown. I wish that people could take your ruling to the bank and pay their bills with it. Of course, they can't. And I think it's unfortunate that a kind of holdover from the days when the King would requisition money to spend on himself, that legislators in 21st century Canada can't make sensible proposals to help people, but I accept your ruling in this case.
Thank you, Mr. Blakey. And then we move to NDP 7.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Happy to motivate this amendment. Sorry, do I?
Yep.
Okay, I just want to make sure I wasn't jumping the gun. We've had this conversation around the table. The government has said that one of the purposes of this bill is to narrow the scope of existing pandemic supports, or at least as they were until October, and to focus in on particularly hard-hit industries. Of course, one of the big conversations around this table has been the fact that within those hard-hit industries, and I'm speaking particularly of tourism, hospitality, arts and culture, we know the industries I'm talking about because they're very clearly laid out in Part 1 of the Act. These are the industries for which the government has said the wage subsidy should continue to apply. But workers who don't work for a company that's eligible for the wage subsidy or sees fit to apply for the wage subsidy, or who work for themselves, don't have access to any kind of financial benefit. What this amendment would do is simply to say that the Canada Worker Lockdown Benefit. I didn't propose an amendment with a better name for that, incidentally, that rolls off the tongue, but if anyone has any suggestions, I would be open to such an amendment. This simply says that people who work in any of those industries that the government already identifies in this bill as requiring exceptional support should be able to qualify for the Canada Worker Lockdown Benefit, whether there's a lockdown order in their region or not. And so that would mean that self-employed workers like independent travel agents, for instance, or some of the folks that we've been talking about in the arts and cultural sector, if they don't work for an employer that would get the wage subsidy under the terms of C2, would be able to apply directly for $300 a week support under the Canada Worker Lockdown Benefit Program. That's what this amendment would accomplish.
Thank you, Mr. Blakey. I will give you my ruling that this amendment is inadmissible, and again, here's my reason for it. Bill C2 provides for further support in response to COVID-19, with the lockdown benefit available to people meeting the criteria established in the bill. The amendment attempts to allow the lockdown benefit to be accessed under specific circumstances, even if a lockdown has not been called. House of Commons Procedure and Practice, third edition, states on page 772, in quote, since an amendment may not infringe upon the financial initiative of the Crown, it is inadmissible if it imposes a change on the public treasury or if it extends the objects or purposes or relaxes the conditions and qualifications specified in the royal recommendation, end quote. So in the opinion of the chair, the amendment proposes a new scheme for the lockdown benefit, which would make available to people not presently eligible under the bill, which would impose a higher charge on the public treasury than the one contemplated in the bill. Therefore, I rule the amendment inadmissible.
If I may, Mr. Chair?
Yes, Mr. Blakey.
In this case, I'll have to respectfully disagree. The amendment doesn't modify anything outside of the bill itself. I think, as legislators, what are we here to do if not to perhaps propose some changes to the qualifying rules for the program? And the amendment doesn't go outside of the bill in order to establish this new criterion. It simply says that workers in sectors that are already outlined within the bill itself would be eligible for this. We all know that these are workers who don't qualify under the wage subsidy. And if they did qualify under the wage subsidy, they wouldn't be able to access the worker lockdown benefit because they would have employment income, and you can't do that, and you can't access the worker lockdown benefit unless you've lost employment income. So I don't know what the role of a legislator is if we can't talk meaningfully about modifying the criteria of the program that the government is laying out in legislation. Of course, there may be a financial, there may well be a financial consequence to this, but it's only as a consequence of better defining certain program criteria. That's got to be what we're here to do, because otherwise it's just it's the rubber stamp of what the government's already decided or not. It doesn't admit of any kind of amendment. So because this is crafted in such a way as to only to appeal to criteria within the Act, I would dispute that it needs a royal recommendation. This is really just about modifying the criteria of access to the program within the considerations that are already within the bill. And I would appeal to my colleagues on committee to agree with me and overturn your ruling, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Blakey, I go to the clerk for a vote on the challenge to the chair's ruling. Yes, so someone. Oh, Monsieur Saint-Marie.
Mr. St. Marie, can we intervene on that decision?
Monsieur Saint-Marie, there.
Mr. St. Marie,
Chair. The legislative clerk would like to help with providing an answer to you, Mr. Blakey.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. To your point, Mr. Blakey, in terms of the royal recommendation, the amount of money counts, of course, when it goes up. There is more money coming out of the CRF, but also the terms and conditions in which the money is spent counts as well. And sometimes you could have a situation where there is not any more money coming out of the Treasury, but the way the money comes out of the Treasury is different, and that would also require a new royal recommendation. So that's where the problem is here.
I don't know,
Mr. Blakey?
far be it for me to get into debate, Mr. Chair, but I mean, one does wonder, we've had private member bills that do many things. Some of them obviously need royal recommendations. I know I wasn't able to get a royal recommendation for extending.
Point of order, Mr. Chair.
Yep. Mr. Beach, point of order.
I just wanted to ask a question. I might be unclear on the rules. My colleague Daniel knows more about this stuff than I do, but there was a challenge to the ruling of the chair. Are we not supposed to proceed directly to a vote, or is that something that we should be discussing?
Yeah. Yes, it is. You are correct. So we will proceed, clerk.
The question is, shall the decision of the chair be sustained? Mr. Baker?
Sustained.
Mr. Beach?
Yes.
Madame Chatel?
Yes.
Ms. Derowitz?
Yes.
Mr. McDonald?
Yes.
Mr. Chambers?
Overturn.
Mr. McLean?
Overturn.
Mr. Polyev?
Overturn.
Mr. Stewart?
Overturn.
Monsieur Saint-Marie?
En faveur.
Mr. Blakey?
Overturn.
Yeas pour 6, nays contre 5, 5.
So the ruling is sustained. Now we move to clerk. Yep. Shall clause 5 carry?
Avec dissidence.
on division.
Division. Yeah, I didn't get the interpretation. Merci, Monsieur Saint-Marie. Okay, on division, and now note to clerk here. So
of the bill, other than clause 1.
that was clause 5 that that we just
Is there, so
carried
there's a
on
clause
division.
6 to come? Is that-
There is a clause 6.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
So I believe we do not.
Have a recorded division on at least one of the clauses, Mr. Chair. So I didn't want to miss the opportunity to have a recorded division on at least one of them.
Short. Okay. So we don't have any amendments before us from clauses 6 to 17 now. So I would ask for unanimous consent of the group if that we would move all of these amendments in one time in one grouping. Look to the
Avec dissidence.
On division.
on division.
Perhaps,
Okay.
well, actually,
That's your
Mr. Chair, if
division.
I may.
Mr. Blakey.
Well, I suppose we'll have a vote on whether the bill as a whole passes.
We will.
Is that correct?
At the end, we will.
All right. Okay. That'll be enough.
So we are now on we are on, oh, Mr. McLean? Yeah.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. And the amendment that I'm proposing, of course, is the extension to not be 2-year extension. We're extending the program here by 6 months. And I believe the previous deadline was March of 2024. And the benefits we're extending in this program by 6 to 8 months, depending on how much we're using the extra 2 months in there as well. But moving the eligibility or the program availability itself in the Government Consolidated Revenue Fund by 2 years, because you're extending the program by 7 months, is an overstep. So I'm proposing we change March 31st, 2026 to September 30th, 2024.
Ms. Zerwitz?
Can this be distributed in writing? Okay, so you have it, and that's enough. I guess my other question is, Mr. Chair, does this require royal recommendation? Is it admissible? That is my question.
I look to the legislative clerk.
But it has financial implications.
Philippe?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't believe it would, because it just reduces the amount of money coming out of the CRF.
Okay, Mr. Baker?
I have a question for Mr. McLean. It's just a point of clarification. Could you articulate again for me why the change? Why you're proposing this?
Certainly, but it is it is a pool of funds. And that pool of funds expires right now as far as any applicability for it on March 31st, 2024. We're extending these benefits by approximately 7 months. Therefore, extending the availability of this pool of funds by 2 years seems like an overstep. I would propose we extend that to September 30th, 2024.
Can I ask another question? Or?
Mr. Baker?
And why is it an overstep?
Why are we adding 2 years into the availability of a fund when we're extending the program by 7 months?
Okay, so I mean, you're answering my question with a question, which may be a fair question, but I'm just trying to, I'm genuinely just trying to understand why you're saying it's an overstep. I'm not trying to put you on the spot. I'm genuinely just trying to understand.
Maybe what we have here is failure to communicate, but we're extending a program by 7 months. I don't see the reason to extend the availability of that program for 2 years. Is that clarification? Okay. We still have, this program ends, the very limit in July of 2022 to settle the accounts by September 30th of 2024 seems like adequate enough time to me. And it is an extension from the current limit.
Mr. Baker?
So I don't know if this is a question I can ask to the officials, Chair, but my question would be to our officials would be, pardon me, my question to the officials would be, what would be the implication? What are the implications of, what would be the implications, are there any positive or negative, of adopting Mr. McLean's suggestion?
Point of order.
I'm not sure that the officials are able to answer that because it wasn't an amendment that was submitted in advance. We had this conversation earlier, right? I mean, the official can only give advice on something that was submitted in writing in advance. I'm sure Mr. McGowan has no opinion on the matter. We might be better served by just advancing our own discussion.
Is that a technical question?
I don't know if Blakey's out of order here, Chair. I'm asking a question to the officials.
Yes, go ahead.
I don't think Mr. Blakey's
Baker.
answering my question, so my question's to the officials.
Is
And if
it
they
a-
can't answer
is
it,
it
they'll
a-
tell me they can't
Is
answer
it a technical
Like, I don't-
question?
Mr.
or
Baker
is it
has
a-
a-
Mr.
Well,
Blakey, I don't
answer
think we
question
need you
to
to
the
tell me
officials.
that they can't answer it. They'll tell me themselves that they can't answer it, right? Let them
Oh,
answer
fair
it.
enough. I'm just trying to sort out what we've heard. That's all. Pardon me. I'm sure the mistake is all mine.
We'll look to the officials.
So it's Benoit Cadieux here. I can take this question. So the activities related to the administration of the Act are more than just the payment of benefits. They also include integrity measures and for example, post verification measures. And these can last much longer than the end of the payment of the benefits. For example, the recovery of overpayments, the recovery of debt can last for many years after the benefits were paid off, were paid. So that's why we're proposing to extend the date for 2 years.
Mr. Baker?
So what I hear, thank you for that, Mr. Cadieux. So what I hear you saying is that if we adopted an earlier date as proposed by Mr. McLean, and, for example, there were post-payment verifications or collections that weren't complete by that time, does that mean that those collections could not be executed after that date?
So what it means is that the funds required to fund those activities could not come out of the CRF. The government would have to come back later on with a further amendment to this act to further extend the end date, or they could perhaps seek those funds some other way through appropriations or through the estimates process.
I've got Mr. Chambers on next.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think the amendment is reasonable in that just from on its face, a seventh month extension ought not to result in the multiple year extension. That being said, I recognize the importance of the post verification process. However, I think it would be incumbent upon Parliament to revisit that question at a time if there was no post-verification work having been completed or we had exhausted that function. I think what we're merely suggesting here is that if we want to go longer, we should come back to the House and seek that direction from the legislative branch.
Okay, I've got Mr. Poliev and then Mr. McLean.
Yes, for the officials, does this 2-year period, authorization period, enable the cabinet to extend the benefits beyond the 7 months that are proposed in the legislation?
It does not, no.
So the 2-year, just to be clear, the 2-year period is strictly the period of the 2 years beyond the 7 months of benefits is strictly for post benefit verification and and recuperation of wrongly paid funds, and not to empower the government to extend benefits?
So this provision allows all activities related to the administration of this act for those funds to come out of the CRF. It does not give the government the power to further extend the end dates of the benefits.
Mr. McLean?
Thank you, Mr. Cadieux, and I need some clarification from you. Before this legislation was in front of this, you had March of 2024 to finish your work on this. Now, for some reason, you're saying, okay, if we extend it by 7 months, we'll need 2 years past that point in order to finish our work, 2 years plus. So I am confused how you're arriving at this new time frame and why the sudden expansion of your work in that respect and the time to do your work. So can you explain that to us, please?
The extension, for example, if you look at the limitation of the time period to impose penalties, there's a 3-year time period to do that, and that's in the Act as well. So this extension would allow to cover activities such as those to happen. So it's simply the recognition that March 31st, 2024 was just not enough time to cover some of the activities that could take place following the end date of the benefits. So that's why an extension of 2 years was proposed to simply give additional time for those activities to take place.
So there was one thing there you said at the beginning about there's legislation here in this revised legislation we're looking at today, C2, that allows 3 more years to.
No, so that's in the existing
Okay.
in the existing Act.
So again, because I still feel like I'm getting a non-answer, and I apologize, Mr. Cadieux, for putting it that way, but you are extending a program by 7 months, and you're extending the limits of the payments in that program to administer it by 2 years. This is still confusing because the current legislation allows you till March of 2024. These benefits are going to extend that by 7 months, and you want to extend the time to administer those benefits by 2 years.
Correct.
I need an answer from you about why you're buying an extra 1.5 years in the process here.
Correct. I think you have to keep in mind as well that this program was put in place in 2020. It was extended a number of times, but this date in particular was not extended every time that the program was extended. So this is just an opportunity to catch up and extend that date as required.
Mr. Chair, I'll yield the amendment if Mr. Cadieux seems quite intent on making that he needs his time. So I will yield.
Okay.
Thank you.
So shall clause 18 carry?
Avec dissidence.
On division.
On division. Okay.
It's because I don't want to move past the point where I could move NEP 8.
Yep.
So I'm just checking in.
I didn't hear you, Mr. Blakey. Yes, go ahead.
I'm just checking in on where we're at with
We are-
respect to
we
where
are-
NEP 8 would be moved. Okay.
It is coming up. It is coming up.
Right on.
we've
I'm just
got- yeah,
excited
so,
and,
yeah.
you know.
So we've got.
I know everyone else is, and
Shall
I didn't want
clause
people to miss their
19 carry?
opportunity to hear about it.
Shall clause 19 carry on division? So that brings us to new clause 19.1, NDP 8. Mr. Blakey.
Right on. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. This amendment simply stipulates that for folks who are being asked to repay CERB amounts, if they're already under the low-income measure, which is the measure that determines whether somebody is living in poverty or not, it would simply say that to the up to the low-income measure, they wouldn't be entitled to repay pandemic benefits, and any benefits any income they have above the low income measure would be clawed back at a rate of 50 cents on the dollar. That would at least allow people to hang on to enough income to meet the poverty line, which isn't a lot of income and makes a big difference in people's lives. I mean, when we talk about people who have committed fraud, I mean, there's been a lot of talk about the FinTrack report. Obviously, one of the features of the reporting out of FinTrack was that in many of the cases that were identified, there were people who were receiving CERB payments under a number of different names into the same account, for instance. These are people who are going to get well above the low income measure. Some of their victims don't. And so, particularly where folks went into, and we talked about this example before, a senior home, signed up a bunch of seniors, said, I'm going to take 10 or 20% of your CERB payment. Those seniors were taken advantage of. They didn't realize what was going on. They're not necessarily in a position to repay the money. We're just saying that those folks who were taken advantage of should only have to pay money back on what they have above the poverty line, so that they're not becoming homeless in order to repay that debt. We heard from Campaign 2000 about the importance of a CERB low-income repayment amnesty. We know that this is affecting a lot of folks that are just legitimately in a tough situation. I've raised on many occasions the situation of foster kids who graduated out of care in Manitoba and were told by the provincial government they had to apply for CERB, and they got it. These are some of the folks that would benefit from a measure like this, and it was a huge oversight of legislation designed to structure Canada's recovery, that those folks are getting left behind, and this is an attempt to make sure that they're not left behind and that they are included in the kind of fundamental recovery framework that the government is advancing.
Mr. Blakey, I will now give you my ruling that this amendment is inadmissible, and here's my reason for it. So Bill C2 provides for further support in response to COVID-19. The amendment attempts to create a mechanism allowing people who have received certain benefits they are not entitled to reimburse 50% of the amount instead of the full amount as provided in the respective acts. If adopted, the amendment would force the government to reimburse people who would have already paid back any amount above the 50% threshold from the Consolidated Revenue Fund. As House of Commons Procedure and Practice, third edition, states on page 772, in quotes, since an amendment may not infringe upon the financial initiative of the Crown, it is inadmissible if it imposes a charge on the public treasury or it extends the objects or purposes or relaxes the conditions and qualifications specified in the royal recommendation, end quote. In the opinion of the chair, the amendment proposes a new scheme for the reimbursement of payments of benefits unduly received, which would impose an increased charge on the public treasury, not envisioned in the bill. Therefore, I rule the amendment inadmissible.
So just to speak to that, Mr. Chair,
Mr.
I mean,
Blakey.
I think what I would say is this. We know that typically you don't need a royal recommendation for the Crown to forgo revenue. So for instance, if I wanted to present a private member's bill that would raise the corporate tax rate from 15% to 16%, that wouldn't be allowed. I would need a royal recommendation for that because that would be revenue coming in. If I wanted to propose a private member's bill reducing the corporate tax rate from 15% to 14%, I could do that because that would be reducing the amount of revenue that the Crown brings in. In this case, on a low-income CERB repayment amnesty, it's about forgoing revenue in that people who would have to pay something back would no longer have to pay that back. So the perversity is that because some people already paid some of that money back, and again, I mean, we're talking about the destitute. So I'm waiting for the conversation to happen like the one we had around dividends, where everyone rushed to defend the complexity and the hardships of companies. I'm looking forward to that conversation that is no doubt about to happen. Because, these are folks who are already in dire straits. And because of some of the most well-meaning people who would stand to benefit under this by perhaps having a bit of a reimbursement, although that's not explicit in the amendment. It doesn't explicitly create a requirement to repay those folks. I agree that as a matter of justice, that would be important, but it's not actually what the amendment does. It's only implied. That would be a government decision to reimburse those funds. They wouldn't be legally required, which is why I think the substance of this amendment is actually about forgoing revenue. It's not about repaying revenue. The last part of your ruling is an interpretation that says that the government would be obligated to repay those who have already repaid. I might think that's a good idea. I do think that's a good idea. But I don't think it's a legal obligation stemming from this amendment. And so here we are, because some people have, put themselves in an even worse financial position because they're honest and they're trying to repay some of that money. We're in a position where we're being told that we can't do what we can normally do, which is to have a proposal that would see the Crown forgo some revenue. That's why I think, I don't think you are perverse, Mr. Chair, and I don't think that perversity is the intention of your ruling. There is something perverse about it, because we're being told that we are denying help to people for a reason that I just think is rather convoluted and rests on the fact that people have been acting in good faith to try and meet what I take to be an unreasonable requirement of the government in the first place. So it's on that basis that I would challenge your ruling, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Blakey. And I go to the clerk for a vote on the challenge to the chair's ruling.
The question is, shall the decision of the chair be sustained? Mr. Baker.
Sustained.
Mr. Beach.
I support the chair, waiting to see if Mr. Blakey was going to interrupt his own at 9:30, but he made it just under the wire.
Was this a yes or a no?
No, that was yes, I support.
Okay. Madame Châtel.
Yes.
Ms. Derowitz.
Oui.
Mr. McDonald.
Yes.
Mr. Chambers.
Overturn.
Mr. McLean.
Overturn.
Mr. Polyev.
Overturn.
Mr. Stewart.
Overturn.
Mr. Sainte-Marie.
En faveur.
Mr. Blakey.
Overturn.
Yeas pour 6, nays contre 5.
Okay. So, I don't know what, shall we, yes. Mr. Polyev also has an amendment at this same place, 19.1.
Yes.
Mr. Polyev.
Point of order, Mr. Speaker, or Mr. Chair.
Mr. Beach.
It's 9:30, or it's actually 9:31. Don't we have a directive to go back?
This is from Mrs. D'Souza. Yeah, this is to come back to your clause, Mr. Blakey. Yes, we do have that at 9:30. Okay, so we will come back to Mr. Blakey's clause 1.
A proposal from the legislative drafters.
From Ms. D'Souza. Do we have a proposal from the legislative drafters from Ms. D'Souza?
Yes, we do. I'm just going to send it to my colleague since I don't have the distribution list, and he's going to.
Okay. So clerk to distribute.
Clerk to distribute, that's right. Thank you, Mr. Chair. The email you are going to receive from the clerk is a draft on NDP 3. If the language is adopted by the committee, they will draft something similar for NDP 4.
Are we waiting for it to be read?
Well, first we're waiting for it to be distributed. It's coming to, I believe, our P9s.
Well, I need to send it to all the P9s. I've sent it to the general distribution.
Mr. Chair, can I suggest we take a 2-minute break, just a bio break? Is that okay?
Okay.
We're
We'll
done.
suspend
Working
for,
right to
we'll
the end.
suspend for a couple
Point
of
of order,
minutes
Mr.
and
Chair.
distribution.
Point of order,
We'll
Mr. Chair.
suspend. Yeah.
Thank you.
Back to work.
Order. And I hope members have. I hope members have received Ms. D'Souza's work on drafting or redrafting Mr. Blakey's NDP 3. Mr. Blakey,
Mr. Chair.
Where did I hear that from?
From
Mr. Beach, yes, Mr. Beach.
Television in the sky. I have not received the draft. I don't know if members there locally have, but I've been refreshing my P9 and I have not received it yet.
Okay. Not go to.
Oh, he wasn't on.
Okay. Yeah, you weren't on the list. You'll be on the list now. We are also trying to get Ms. D'Souza and see if she's available. If you have any any questions.
I think probably what happened, somebody lapsed back to when the Liberals had said they wouldn't have parliamentary secretaries on committee, and they must have been in that frame of mind, and then they accidentally left them off the list. They forgot that you guys had gone back on that commitment, probably. Some of us remember, though. It's okay. It was a platform commitment.
I can confirm, Mr. Chair, I now have a draft. Just reading it now.
Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, Mr. Chair, point of order. Just I'm looking at the revised section, section 18.1, and there is still the section B. Didn't we not delete that or eliminate that in an earlier vote? And if we did, I just didn't know why it was still there. Was it just inadvertently just left there?
Going to be answered by the legislative clerk.
Yes, you're right. B was taken off, but Isabel didn't know because she wasn't.
Okay, I just want to make sure that we're all clear on that.
Yes.
If that's okay. Yeah. Thank you.
And Philippe, if you could just let us know exactly what Isabel did here.
What Ms. D'Souza explained to me is basically that they translated in legislative terms what Mr. McLean's proposal was. When it comes to the effect of it, in terms of fiscal effects, it would be more for the officials to answer.
Okay. And I've got Mr. Baker, Madame Châtel. Yeah, Mr. Baker.
Thanks very much. So, so on this revised, would the officials have a copy of this? The officials who are like the witnesses?
No, the officials do not have a copy. Oh, the clerk is just about to send it to them.
Because what I wanted to do was to ask our officials to help us understand what the implications of this would be, right? So, so maybe I'll just give the clerk a second to do that. But my concern is understanding, now that we've got this new language, and I know it's developed with the best of intention. So, what are the implications, and then is it possible that, I'm not a tax lawyer, but does this, well, let me ask this: is it possible that this would capture any kind of the language in yellow, taxable dividends to an individual who is a holder of common shares of the company, of the subsidiary of the company? Would that in any way inadvertently capture funds that were meant for business operations in any way? Would that inhibit a company from operating its business in any way?
I'm not sure if the officials have received that information.
Point d'ordre, Monsieur le Président.
Point of order, Chair. Point of order. It just takes a bit of logic. Earlier, we said we couldn't ask any questions that weren't technical to the officials, and now that the motion is not adopted, we can't discuss it. Once it's adopted, then we can discuss it. That was what was decided for Mr. Blakey's amendment. Now we have an amendment on which we're going to vote that is similar to the intention that was raised, and we said earlier that we have to adopt it before we can ask questions to the officials. Now we're ready to ask them questions before we adopt it. I don't mind, but I would like us to be more rigorous and more consistent in the way we do things. Thank you.
Okay. Merci, Monsieur Samari.
Thank you. Ms. Châtel? The risk by drafting this on the fly? Well, I have lots of questions. First, what is a taxable dividend?
The increase of the pay up capital or not, I don't know. Holder, what's a holder? Can you find it in the Income Tax Act? No. Who hold? How do you hold? What do you mean by holder? Who's a holder? I don't know. You'll need the definition. I don't know. What is a subsidiary? Is it a wholly owned, partially owned? When do you decide it's a subsidiary or it isn't? So this is not serious drafting. And I see like 5 problems with this particular definition. It doesn't fit in the Income Tax Act. So there's a risk. If this committee wanted to do some drafting, it has to be more rigorous, because we are creating problem for taxpayers, despite what my colleagues want to achieve. It's not rigorous, and it is not the way people do drafting in this country.
Mr. Chambers?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I actually think that this is a fairly serious attempt, and I thank Ms. D'Souza for working on a very short timeline to give us a workable amendment. And I would say that it will only be applied to those taxpayers and situations that CRA determines to apply it to, and issue an interpretive bulletin to that effect. And I do believe they'll have significant amount of time to clarify any ambiguity or vagueness. And I think for that reason, it's incredibly reasonable, and I think actually a miracle that we had Ms. D'Souza available at our disposal, and I thank her very much for that work. And I look forward, frankly, to the good work of CRA to clarify this for us upon royal assent. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Blakey.
Like to likewise offer my thanks to Ms. D'Souza and suggest again, I mean, if we don't do something about this tonight, then nothing's going to get done about it. It may be the case that within the Finance Department and the CRA, people on the government bench are able to come up with a better amendment. And it may be the case, because I see a lot of agreement around this table. So say the government had an amendment that actually dealt with this in a way that they thought was acceptable, then they might be able to propose an amendment to the legislation in the House by unanimous consent. It seems to me that there's a lot of goodwill around the table. But if we don't pass an amendment, then it'll be a non-issue. The government won't do that work. They won't come to the House with anything. So I'm willing to bet that if it's as much a problem as people on the government bench say it is, that they can develop a solution in a timely way and we can get this done properly. But if we pass up the opportunity to make some progress tonight, that we won't see anything done about it at all. And that's why I'm quite happy to support amending this legislation in the modified way that we've come to an agreement on, either with Mr. McLean's original language or also with the language of the drafter. I have a higher level of comfort with language vetted by the drafter, so that would be my first pick. But I think we need to create a sense of urgency by showing the legislative intention to do something about this problem in respect of dividends. And if there's a better answer out there, then the government should be telling its folks to develop a better solution within the next few days and bring it to the House. And there's nothing we can't do in the House of Commons by unanimous consent.
Thank you, Mr. Beach.
Thank you, and I do take the last member's point of what we can and can't do in the House quite seriously. I had prepared previously, before we moved to the 9:30 hold and then the drafting, a series of issues with the original motion NDP 4. A number of those revolved around dividends and was drafted, or was raised actually by members around the table. The issue of preferred shares, assumably taxable, but treated more as a debt instrument than as a dividend payout. Issues that would arise within a group of companies if dividends were put out by one company within that group, but the wage subsidy was collected by another. And I guess my greatest concern, which has already been raised by one of my colleagues, is that if we do put legislation like this that is drafted with incredible implications on the fly, we may not get the results that we want, although there are other methods to get the results that we want that may not be resolved in the next 9 minutes. Earlier this evening, we had an amendment presented to address a concern that I think was raised by Mr. McLean, but clarified. The intent of the motion clarified by Mr. Polyev. With regards to an extension of a time limit, the intention was to not make funds available, or the intention of the amendment was to not make funds available or to allow the government to extend further benefits without having to come back to the House of Commons. At least that was the concern, as I understood it, that was raised by our conservative friends around the table. The effect was to stop the post-verification of the program, which is something that all of us over the course of the last week have discussed the importance of. So,
point of order, Mr. Chair. Mr. Beach is prattling on about something extraneous that we've already yielded to that is decided. Can we get to the point on the motion at hand?
Is that a point of order, Mr. Beach?
Yeah, and to my friend Mr. McLean, I was actually just concluding. So I'm happy to yield the floor, having made my point. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, I see no further discussion. So, Clerk, is this the we are looking at the amendment now to NDP 3, correct? Okay, the amendment to NDP 3.
So, if I may, Mr. Chair, just a quick question. This is actually
NDP's amendment 3. Yes.
Sorry, and
Mr.
just a quick
Blakey.
question. This is more actually a question to Mr. McLean, because we have now his original suggestion, which is the wording in the sub-amendments that have been moved, and then we have the wording that's been proposed by the drafter. So I'm just wondering how we're going to proceed. If Mr. McLean would rather that we vote on the language from the drafter, I'm happy to do that. If he'd rather have a vote on his original language, that's fine too. I just want to know how we're going to proceed from you, Mr. Chair. But first, I'd like to hear kind of what, if Mr. McLean has some reflections on that, I'd appreciate hearing them.
Okay.
Thank you. I think that the legislative drafter is more experienced at this than I am. And it is a friendly amendment to your motion, Mr. Blakey. So if you are more comfortable with that draft motion, I think you should move that motion, and that should be part of your motion.
Sure. Then I would happily substitute the language of the drafter for Mr. McLean's language in the sub amendments for 3 and 4, if we can do that all at once, or if we need to do that on 3 and then have that brought to the committee in the next 5 minutes for number 4, so be it.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
We'll get a vote
Mr.
on
Blakey, no, we won't be able to do 3 and 4 at the same time because the language may be different in 4. What the drafters wanted was just to adopt the language, and once the language is adopted, they can draft for NDP 4. because the paragraph is not the same in the same way.
Okay. So in order to have two votes that are going to be consistent with each other by virtue of the clock, we need to vote on Mr. McLean's original language anyway. In that case, I think consistency would be better than inconsistency, and we should probably go ahead with a vote on Mr. McLean's language. Well, what we're being told is we could vote, on pourrait avoir un vote sur le 3.
We could vote on 3 that the drafter wrote, but there's no other wording for Amendment 4. So if we pass 3, well, we won't have the language for 4 yet, but it'll be the same as what we have in 3. Inaudible.
My own point of view, Mr. Chair, is that what the drafter has done is similar in form to what Mr. McLean was doing, in that she's pretty much replaced dividends with a term. And if it's possible to just swap out those terms, then we may be able to do this ourselves.
So what are you proposing? Is this Mr. McLean's or is this Ms. D'Souza's draft? Yes.
So,
Madame Chatel, on this, the time is of the essence.
At least this version is more aligned with the existing language in C2 and the Income Tax Act that C2 amends. There, yeah.
Vote on the drafter's language in 3, as long as we can have a vote on 4 that will reflect that same language change. So that would mean replacing dividends in 4 with the term taxable dividends to an individual who is a holder of common shares of the company or of the subsidiary of the company. If we can do that, then it's no problem, because we'll have consistency in the language.
I'm just going to look to the legislative clerk.
Well, the prime is they won't have time to draft NDP 4 before 10. That's pretty much a given at this point.
Except that it's a straight swap of terms. So the term dividend in 4 is removed, and it would be replaced by the same term. Everything that's highlighted in the NDP 3 as submitted by the drafter this evening. So
if it's the will of the committee to adopt it that way.
Okay. Okay.
Okay.
Okay.
So we're going to Okay, so we are going to a vote on the amendment first to NDP 3 amendment.
Sorry, my hand's raised, Mr. Chair.
Oh, sorry, Mr. Beach.
And I'm a little confused myself at this stage whether this is an appropriate action given the discussion tonight. But with regards to my previous comments, particularly around preferred shares and dividends within groups of companies, I just want to ask the officials if those concerns, which were raised by officials earlier in this meeting, are addressed by this redraft that is currently being presented to us.
They can't answer that. They can't answer that. They already said so, and so did you.
And clerk, I think the language, we do have the language for NDP 4.
Yes, Mr. Chair, I just received it, so I just passed it to my colleague who is going to pass it on to you.
First is what we are voting on.
No, I think it was a friendly amendment, and I think Mr. Blakey accepted the friendly amendment.
Yes.
I think, well, I'll leave it to the clerk.
Yes.
There is no such a thing as friendly amendment. Once you move an amendment, it has to
All right.
be adopted by the whole committee.
So clerk on the sub-amendment. Mr. Baker?
Sorry, I need clarification, Chair, on what we're voting on. Sorry.
It's a yay or a nay. The two options.
Polyev, I was speaking to the chair. I need clarification
Yeah,
on what we're voting
I'm
on.
just clarifying
So-
for you how voting works.
No, I'm fine, thanks. I'm asking the chair a question.
So we are voting on, legislative clerk, we are voting on a sub-amendment to, a sub-amendment of Mr. McLean's.
Yes, Mr. Chair, we're voting on the sub-amendment to NDP 3 that was provided by the law clerk's office, the yellow part of the amendment that you have received, without the B portion of the amendment, which was removed prior.
Thank you for that clarity. Thank you.
Mr. Baker,
Opposed.
Mr. Beach,
Opposed?
Madame Chatel,
Opposed.
Ms. Derowitz,
Opposed.
Mr. McDonald,
Opposed.
Mr. Chambers,
In favor.
Mr. McLean,
For.
Mr. Polyev,
Or
Mr. Stewart,
In favor.
Monsieur Sainte-Marie,
En faveur.
Mr. Blakey.
En faveur.
Yeas pour 6, nays contre 5.
Okay, carried. So now we move to, is it, yes? Okay, the amendment as amended in NDP 3. Clerk.
Mr. Baker,
No.
Mr. Beach,
Opposed?
Madame Chatel,
Opposed.
Ms. Derowitz,
Opposed.
Mr. McDonald,
Opposed.
Mr. Chambers,
In favor.
Mr. McLean,
In favor.
Mr. Polyev,
favor.
Mr. Stewart,
In favor.
Monsieur Sainte-Marie,
En faveur.
Mr. Blakey.
In favor.
Yeas pour 6, nays contre 5.
Carried. So clerk, do we go to, okay.
With the wording that was just sent by
Okay, this will be NDP 4 with the new wording. So shall NDP 4 carry? No? For the new text, we were going to do a sub-amendment first vote, and then we will vote on the amendment as amended. On the
Before I call the vote, can you explain what you're talking about? I'm sorry.
Yeah, so this is the new wording that was drafted for NDP, no, for the sub-amendment, the new wording that was drafted, correct? For NDP 4, yes.
Thank you.
Okay. Yes, Madame Chatel.
Clarification. So we have adopted the NDP proposal, and now we're voting for the yellow? No, okay.
The changes from Ms. D'Souza, I don't know Ms. D'Souza's title, that were brought into NDP 3, then we have also adopted those to NDP 4. Is that correct?
No.
No, that is not correct.
What we have adopted so far is the yellow portion in NDP 3. Now the NDP 4 has been circulated to the member of the committee, and that's why we are voting on the sub-amendment part.
I got it. Okay.
Okay, so we are voting to the sub-amendment of 4.
On 4, yeah.
On 4.
And somebody should move it.
Okay, Mr. Chambers moves it.
Okay.
Okay, clerk, yes.
Mr. Baker, Mr. Beach,
Opposed?
Madame Chatel,
Opposed.
Ms. Derowitz,
No.
Mr. McDonald,
Opposed.
Mr. Chambers,
In favor.
Mr. McLean,
In favor.
Mr. Polyev,
Favor.
Mr. Stewart,
In favor.
Monsieur Sainte-Marie,
En faveur.
Mr. Blakey,
En faveur.
Yeas pour 6, 6. Nays contre 5, 5.
Okay, the sub-amendment is carried. Now we move to NDP 4 as amended. Clerk?
Mr. Baker. Mr. Beach.
Opposed?
Madame Chatel. Ms. Derwitz.
No.
Mr. McDonald.
Opposed.
Mr. Chambers.
In favor.
Mr. McLean.
In favor.
Mr. Polyev.
Favor.
Mr. Stewart.
In favor.
Monsieur Sainte-Marie.
En faveur.
Monsieur Blakey.
In favor.
Yeas pour 6, 6. Nays contre 5, 5.
Carried. Yep. Shall clause 1 as amended carry. On division. And now, clerk, we go back to. Is it okay? And do
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Based on the advice from the legislative clerk in 19.1.1b, I'm removing the word Canada Emergency Student Benefit. And also based on his advice in 19.1.1d, after the word made, I'm adding under the Canada Worker Lockdown Benefit Act, the Canada Recovery Benefit Act, the Canada Emergency Response Benefit, and the Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy. That is to the first change is because the Canada Student Benefit.
order?
Debate. We're allowed to.
There is no debating.
That's right.
No, yeah, we are past 10.
I'm not debating.
Yeah.
Clarifying the reason for that change, but
We'll just read it in 19.1, and then we will go right to a vote.
all right. Are those changes registered? The changes are registered.
They have
Excellent.
been registered. Okay.
Thank you.
So 19.1, clerk.
Mr. Baker.
Opposed.
Mr. Beach.
Opposed?
Madame Chatel. Ms. Derwitz.
Opposed.
Mr. McDonald.
Opposed.
Mr. Chambers.
In favor.
Mr. McLean.
In favor.
Mr. Polyev.
In favor.
Mr. Stewart.
In favor.
Monsieur Sainte-Marie.
En faveur.
Mr. Blakey.
In favor.
Yeas pour 6, 6. Nays contre 5, 5.
Carried. What do we have up next, clerk? Shall clause 20 carry? On division? Actually, can we group these at this time? Yes? Okay. So if we can just group clause 21 to 29. And I see no, okay. So 21 to 29. Shall clauses 21 to 29 pass?
Avec dissidence.
On division.
On division. Okay, that brings us to the title. Shall the title carry?
Avec dissidence.
On division.
Shall the bill as amended carry?
Avec dissidence.
On division.
On division?
Oh.
Yes, for a recorded vote. Yeah, clerk, a recorded vote.
Mr. Baker.
In favor.
Mr. Beach.
In favor.
Madame Chatel.
In favor.
Ms. Derwitz.
In favor.
Mr. McDonald.
In favor.
Mr. Chambers.
Opposed.
Mr. McLean.
Opposed.
Mr. Polyev.
Against.
Mr. Stewart.
Opposed.
Mr. Sainte-Marie.
En faveur.
Mr. Blakey.
Nay.
Yeas pour 6, nays contre 5.
Carried. Shall the chair report the bill as amended to the House?
Avec dissidence.
On division.
Shall the committee order a reprint of the bill as amended for the use of the House at report stage?
Avec dissidence.
On division.
Feeney? Okay, well, thank you very much to all the members for getting through this bill, and it will be reported. The report will be tabled.
Point
in the
d'ordre,
House.
Monsieur le Président.
Point of order, Chair. Did we adopt the title? That's very important. Yes. Okay. Thank you.
Yes. Yep. So yeah, tabled in the House, and we think by maybe tomorrow.
Yes.
Okay, that sounded very firm. That sounded firm. Maybe tomorrow. Okay. I call this meeting adjourned. Have a good evening, everyone.